This took place back when the first Insidious movie came out. My friend Charlie and I went to see the 10 p.m. screening of it at one of our local movie theaters. The theater we went to went out of business years ago, likely due to the fact that it didn't get enough business. I say that because every time we went there, the theater was completely dead, aside from maybe 3 or 4 other people at most. This night was no exception. Besides Charlie and I, there were 2 other people in the theater, one somewhat larger woman and one scrawny man about 5'7". During the previews before the movie, the man kept getting up and switching seats. It immediately struck us as bizarre. Every time he'd get up, he'd look around the room and even look at Charlie and I for a few seconds every time. Eventually, he walked over to the woman a few seats down from him and started speaking to her in a whisper. She said something back to him that we couldn't hear. Then he said sorry and walked away from her to sit at the last seat in the aisle. He was just 2 aisles down from us. Eventually the movie started, and the opening scene to the movie was a bit scary. It was followed by this loud, scary violin sound. We noticed the guy 2 aisles down shaking his head, and he muttered something. Then he turned around at us and climbed up to our aisle and sat down 2 seats from me. He asked if it's okay he sat there, and I nodded. He said thank you really loud, and I noticed the woman in front of us turned around to look. Charlie and I looked at each other nervously. As the movie went on, he was quiet after the opening scene, until the next time a scary scene came up. He moved to the seat directly next to me and once again asked if it's okay. I don't know why, but I nodded again. I guess because I recognized he may have had a disability or something. He went quiet again when the scary scene ended, but at the next jump scare, he grabbed a hold of my arm and pressed his head into my shoulder. I shook my arm to get him off and said, "Dude, get off me." He apologized and said he's just really scared. I looked at him and he just scared me. He seemed off, way off. He told me he would stop and he apologized again. But when another scary scene came up, he grabbed my arm again. This time he started rubbing my arm a little. I told him to stop again. Then Charlie and I got up and walked to a different aisle. The woman in the theater got up and left, I'm guessing because she was uncomfortable. As we were in our new seats, he turned to look at us for a while. We tried our best to ignore it, but it was too much. We got up and started walking out of the theater. He got up as well, asking where we're going, and then he asked if he could take us out for dinner. Charlie said, "Nah man, we're good, thanks," and we walked out. We walked through the empty movie theater hall and heard the door to the room we were just in click open. We turned around and there was the guy, peeking his head out from the door. When he realized we saw him, he went back into the room. Charlie and I walked faster now to the lobby and told the girl at the front desk about the creepy man making everyone uncomfortable. She gave us a refund because the woman before us also complained about him. We then left and started walking to Charlie's house, hitting his vape pen and just talking about how weird and creepy that was. We were somehow able to laugh about it, even though we were also pissed that we just left the movie halfway through. On our walk home, we both stopped when we heard a rustle in a bush about 10 feet from us and a muffled little laugh sound. Charlie pointed to a bush in front of a house, and we could see that man from the theater creepily poking his head out from a bush. He asked, "Where are you guys going?" He said it with this tone that said everything to us, that we needed to run. We sprinted all the way down the street till I felt like I was gonna throw up. Luckily at that point, Charlie's house was right there. We weren't being followed anymore. He looked weak and probably not fast anyway, but we weren't risking getting shot or stabbed. Something was very off about that man. Maybe he was drugged out, or maybe he belonged in a mental hospital. I'm glad we decided to run. I don't care if anyone judges me, but I like to go to the movie theaters alone. My work schedule is all over the place. I often don't work weeknights. So on a stormy Wednesday night, a night not many other people would be thinking to go drive to a movie theater, I did just that. I always like avoiding crowds in anything I do. That's just how I am. It was 2017. I went to see some low-key movie that probably wasn't at the top of most people's must-see movie lists. I was the only one in the theater, just like I expected. I sat myself right in the center seat of one of the higher-up rows and put my feet up on the seat in front of me. About 20 minutes into the movie, I'd say, I noticed someone a few aisles down. I didn't notice them coming in. The theater was dark because the scene in the movie at the time was in a dark room. They weren't sitting in a seat like a normal person though. All I saw of them was the top half of their head. peering over one of the seats to be looking in a direction that definitely was not the screen. It was still too dark to be able to tell if they were looking directly at me or not, but when the scene changed to a brighter background, the whole theater got brighter. Bright enough to see they were looking basically at me. But their face was so pale and lifeless looking, and their hair messy and wiry looking. I couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman. I'm an introvert, or just an awkward person, so I didn't really want to ask if there was something wrong. I viewed that as confrontation. The screen went darker again, and at the same time, the person lowered down behind the chair completely until I couldn't see them anymore. They were completely hidden from my view. I couldn't concentrate on the movie now, though. I was actually very uncomfortable. Actually quite terrified. I didn't get up, though. I stayed put in my seat. Many scenes in the movie passed. I almost forgot about what happened. Almost. Just when I was getting back into the movie, the person's head appeared from behind a seat again. This time much closer, only like 3 rows of seats away from me. I actually let out a holy shit and a loud yell because it genuinely made me jump. Now I was able to see more detail or features in their face. They actually looked lifeless. Their eyes, motionless, hung open. But still, I somehow couldn't tell if they were looking directly at me or not. Now I could better see it was a man with long, unkempt hair. I noped the F out of my seat and down the road to the exit. I had to pass the row in which the person was in to get to the exit door. As I passed the row, I looked down it, and while I expected to see the rest of the person's body sitting hunched behind the seats, instead what I saw was something you'd see in a nightmare. There was some guy basically laying on the floor, holding up a severed head perched on a stick. I didn't stick around to see if it was some sick joke or if the head was real or not. I ran for it through the exit door, and I ran out of the back exit of the building to the parking lot. I drove home in a panic, heart racing. That head looked so real. I got home and did some research about possible recent murders or missing people in the area, and I found something. After browsing a list of missing people in the area, I found a picture of a 17-year-old boy named Donald Watkins who had gone missing a month prior, and based on the picture I found, his face could have matched the head I saw in that theater. Of course, that could be my brain trying to connect any similarities, but the hair, the nose, the eyes, they looked like they could actually be a match. The next day, I simply made a call to the theater and told them the story and suggested they check their cameras and see if anything strange came up. I gave them my number to reach me if they needed to, but I never heard from them. I chose to not spend any more of my time on it. I worked at a movie theater in Cobb County, Georgia called the Regal at Estelle. It was a very relaxed atmosphere because it's a quiet town and a quiet movie theater usually. Some weekends it would be busy, especially for big blockbuster movies. This happened on a slow night. I was working the graveyard shift. The theater was doing a midnight screening for some underground scary movie that no one really cared about. A few people actually paid to go see it. Obviously this meant I'd have to stay till the movie was over so I could clean and close up. Past midnight the theater was always basically dead. The phone at the front ticket desk was ringing, so I went from the concession counter to the front desk to answer it. After saying hello twice, some creepy, distant-sounding voice asked me what time we're open till. By distant, I mean I actually felt like he was whispering into the phone, or like his face was 2 feet away from the phone. When I told him the midnight screening ended around 2 a.m., he said, "I'll see you soon." I opened my mouth and went, but I didn't actually know what to say. He hung up. I didn't like the sound of that, "I'll see you soon." I went back to the concession counter to just scroll on Instagram and other time waster apps on my phone. Then the phone rang again. I didn't want to answer it because I somehow knew it would be that guy again. No one calls a movie theater that late. Still, I went to answer it. Like the first time, I didn't get a response till the second hello, and it was the same guy. He said into the phone, "I'm on my way." I replied, "Sir, the movie already started. There's no point in coming now. I won't even be able to give you a ticket this late." He hung up. This had to be a joke. Possibly one of my friends. The voice just didn't sound familiar at all. As the movie was nearing its end, I started vacuuming the lobby and halls, then went to cleaning the bathroom. As I was cleaning the bathroom, someone came in and went to one of the stalls. That meant the movie was likely over. so I stopped cleaning to go back to the counter. People were on their way out, so yes, the movie was over. I waited till everyone was gone, then locked the door. All I had left to do was clean the theater, which wasn't a big job because there were so few people in there. I brought the broom in there and scanned the aisles for trash. There was a little popcorn here and there and some wrappers. It would have been a quick cleanup, but I didn't finish it. I heard this freakish giggle sound. My head jerked to the left to look down the aisles of seats. "Is someone there?" I asked. I hurried out of the theater with a broom and scooper, ready to use the broom as a weapon if needed. And as I was back in the lobby, the phone rang again. It was like perfect timing. I ran to answer it, and without saying anything this time, the voice said, "Why'd you leave the theater?" I hung it up and called the police, asking them to just get here fast. I waited in my car until they arrived, then told them about the calls and the laugh in the theater room. The police asked me to calm down and check the number from which he was calling and see if I recognized it. So I went to the call history on the phone, got the number and put it into my phone. And it was the number for one of my close friends, Joe Peterson. That explained it. He was just messing with me. The cops laughed about it, and after I assured them I was all right, they left. I didn't want Joe to get in trouble. I went back in the theater room calling for him. I called for him throughout the whole building, but he didn't answer. It seemed he left. I texted him and tried calling him, all ignored. I went home after locking the place up. The next day I went to his house just to talk to him because it seemed he was ignoring me. But he told me he lost his phone, that he thinks it was stolen by someone at the bar. He didn't have Find My iPhone enabled, so he couldn't even track it or disable it. I couldn't sleep for nights, worrying that I was followed home by whoever had his phone. Being one of Joe's female friends, whoever stole his phone must have went through our conversations and gotten enough info to know where I worked. That horrifies me. I requested to my boss to stop doing the late night shifts for that reason. I didn't work there much longer though. If anything else ever happens, I'd update. But it's already been more than a year. Growing up in the suburbs, one thing I always enjoyed in the summertime was the ice cream truck, specifically Mr. Softy. As a very little kid, anytime I'd hear the song of the Mr. Softy truck echoing through the streets, I'd beg my mom for a few dollars and run outside to wave down the truck. I remember one of the first times I was ever left home alone. I was, I think, 7 years old. My mom was away somewhere and my dad was off that day. He apparently entrusted me to be home alone for a few minutes while he ran to the store. He was definitely the less responsible parent. I was in the living room watching SpongeBob, I'm pretty sure, when I heard the familiar sound of the Mr. Softy tune outside. I rushed to the kitchen and climbed onto a chair to reach the little basket on the ledge that usually had stray dollars and coins inside. I grabbed a dollar bill and some coins. I couldn't tell you the exact amount, obviously. I ran outside to the street and waved the truck down just in time. It pulled over, and the oldish man came to the window asking what I wanted. When I asked for a specialty cone, he told me I was a little short with the money I had. I believe I told him I didn't have any more money because my parents weren't home. I distinctly remember him asking me, "You're home alone?" as if he were confirming it. I said yes, and he started acting all friendly and understanding. He told me to come into the truck so that I could make my own ice cream cone. I stepped into the truck, and the man went and shut the door. He told me to help myself to whatever ice cream I wanted. He said he was going to show me how to be an ice cream man, and he went to the driver's seat of the truck and started driving us somewhere. My young, innocent self thought this was all super exciting as I was pouring soft serve ice cream into a cone. But I finished that cone and then started wondering where we were going, as we had been driving for a while. I went to the front of the truck to ask him, and he asked me in a more stern voice than he'd been speaking in to please go stay in the back of the truck. I listened to him. My appetite for more ice cream was suddenly gone as I got more uncomfortable. We went from a busy main road to a quiet residential road. At some point, I noticed the ice cream truck's music wasn't playing, and he was driving rather fast. The truck finally stopped in front of some abandoned-looking building, and he asked me to come follow him outside to the building. But not before we heard a tapping on the door of the truck. I heard a familiar, concerned voice yelling through the crack of the door. The man opened the door, and my neighbor Margie walked into the truck. She saw me and came to grab me by the arm and pull me out of the truck. She told me to wait in her car while she ran back to yell at the man. I was extremely confused at first. The man in the ice cream truck sped off down the street. This was a time before cell phones. She couldn't just call 911 right away. She ran to the nearest house. At first I was confused, but obviously I know now she was asking for the owner's phone. She called 911, and I'm sure she reported the suspicious ice cream truck and attempted kidnapping. I don't remember the rest, except telling Margie my story, her driving me home to be greeted by my dad and cop cars, and then being told to go inside after telling a couple police officers what happened. The exact ice cream truck was found. I'm not sure how they did it. Maybe by investigating street camera footage and getting the plate number. I was made to confirm the driver was in fact the man who took me into the truck. He was sentenced to prison. That's all my parents told me. I don't think they know his name. Either that or they didn't want to give it to me. Definitely not a memory I like thinking back on. Up until I was 28, I used to live with my parents in Camden, Maine, a rural boat town. They were hardly ever home because of work and just traveling a lot, so I'd hold down the fort a lot. My parents' property is large and private, so when they weren't home I'd often throw little parties. This was one of those nights. I had maybe 15 to 20 people over and we all hung out in the backyard. It started around 6 p.m. and people started leaving around 11 p.m. By midnight everyone was gone, and I was absolutely shot from a mixture of having been in the sun most of the day and then drinking since around 6. I changed and got into bed. Before I could even fall asleep though, I heard something one would not expect to hear this late at night. It was the sound of an ice cream truck, only it was a tune I'd never heard before, a kind of creepy sounding one. The tune got louder until it seemed to be right outside. I lay there waiting a minute or two for it to go away, but when it didn't, I finally got up and went to the window to look outside. I couldn't see anything from my bedroom window, so I went downstairs and looked out the living room window. I could vaguely see what had to be an ice cream truck out on the lawn. My heart started pounding the inside of my chest. Who was it? Why were they here? What did they want? I paced around the living room for a bit, not knowing whether to call the police or my dad, or just simply wait for them to leave. The awful tune of the ice cream truck didn't stop though, it grew sickening. I ended up finally snapping and going out the front door to the porch. There, I could more clearly see the ice cream truck parked on our property, like a little less than 100 feet away from the porch. It was parked on the grass, and it wasn't exactly a typical looking ice cream truck. It was like a white van with ice cream pictures stamped or painted on. I was a mix of confused and worried, mostly worried. Saying it was an abnormal sight would be a gross understatement. I stepped onto the grass with my bare feet and walked just a little closer to the van. The headlights weren't on, so when I got close enough, I saw there was no one in the driver's seat. When I got even closer, I saw one of the sliding doors on the side was open. I suddenly felt as though I could be jumped at any second. I looked around me in a panic, and then ran back inside the house and locked the door. Now I did call 911, and I asked them to please hurry. The woman asked me to walk around the house and check to make sure everything was locked. I started from the main floor and worked down to the den to the back door, and the glass panel on the back door was shattered. It was unlocked and opened. I whispered this to the 911 operator, even though I was truly freaking out inside. She told me to go to a room with a lockable door and wait there until officers arrived. So I tiptoed to the nearest bathroom and locked the door. The operator told me to stay on the line and be quiet. A few moments later, someone on the other side of the door tried turning the doorknob. Then they banged on the door 3 times. The woman on the phone said quietly that she heard it and for me to remain quiet and calm. Then I heard the back door to the house slam shut, and half a minute later, the tune of the ice cream truck slowly faded away as the van was driven off. I told the woman, but she said to wait until officers arrived. They took a disgustingly long time to arrive. I was waiting in that bathroom for another 5 minutes. If they arrived in a timely manner, they could have caught whoever was at my parents' house. Instead, all that happened was I got a police report. My personal theory is the ice cream truck tune was supposed to be a distraction or something, while one of the people in it broke into the house, as I'm sure there were more than one person in that van. I'm happy this happened to me when I was 23 and not, say, 10 years old, because that would have traumatized me. This happened a long time ago. I was in the 6th grade. People used to call me Jimmy until around high school. There was this ice cream truck that would always drive down my block once a day in the warmer months. The driver got to know me on a more personal level. He knew my name and I knew his, Bernard. I'd go outside for ice cream so often that he'd slow down or sometimes even stop for a minute in front of my house waiting for me to come outside, knowing I was a frequent customer. Anytime I'd buy ice cream from his truck, I'd always get the same Oreo ice cream cup. He'd always stop and talk to me for a few minutes, and sometimes he'd give me free ice cream. There was this one Friday though, and I remember it was a Friday because it was the start of the weekend that my parents were going away. On this Friday, Bernard once again passed my house, and it was one of the days that I went outside to buy from him. On this day though, he gave it to me for free again, and because of that I stuck around and chatted with him for a while. He asked me how things were going and whatnot, and I told him I was excited to have the house to myself for the weekend. He was surprised that I would have the house to myself at such a young age. He said I was lucky and to enjoy. Then he drove off, and the truck eventually disappeared along with the music. The rest of the story is the part that you may not even believe. I stayed up late in my room because my parents weren't home. I was playing video games on my computer when I heard the sound of Bernard's ice cream truck. It didn't start from the distance and slowly get louder. No, it literally seemed to turn on right outside my house. I went to my window and saw the truck right outside, playing the music at this late hour in the night, past midnight. It had to be Bernard, but what was he doing? The music suddenly stopped, and the truck's lights turned off. I opened my window a crack just to listen for what might be going on. Just the sound of crickets, until I saw Bernard appear from the darkness, quickly approaching my window, yelling, "Jimmy." He stopped when his face basically banged into my window, and he started telling me to come outside. He told me I could get all the free ice cream I wanted, but the way he was speaking, he seemed off. He seemed like he was on something. His movements were spastic and sporadic. He then tried pulling my window further open aggressively, and I screamed and yanked it closed. He started knocking on the window, and I screamed and begged him to leave or I'm calling the cops. When I said that, he turned around and ran back to his truck. The lights turned back on and he drove off into the night without the music playing. I was so scared I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to call my parents, and I was scared to call the cops. I just locked my bedroom door and tried to go to sleep, but it was a long night before I fell asleep. Bernard never returned to my block after that. But anytime I'd hear an ice cream truck passing by, I'd get paranoid it was him. My cousin Nate is in the Coast Guard, and he has been for over a decade. He's not the kind of guy to lie or make things up. He's one of the most straightforward people I know. Real grounded and not superstitious, not into horror, just a practical guy who likes boats and order. He told me this story in the summer of 2022. I asked him to repeat it more than once because of how messed up it was, and every time, the details stayed the same. This happened back in 2017, when he was assigned to a lighthouse off the coast of Maine on a 2-week maintenance rotation. The place was called Matinicus Rock, and it's way out there. You can only get to it by boat or helicopter. It's nothing more than a jagged, rocky island with a single lighthouse and one auxiliary building that stores fuel and maintenance equipment. There is no power grid, no plumbing, and barely any cell signal. The lighthouse itself is automated, but it still requires occasional manual upkeep, which is why the Coast Guard sends people out to it every year or so. Usually it's a solo assignment, but there had been strange electrical failures the year before, so for this trip they decided to send 2 people, Nate and another guy named Russell. The first few days were fine, windy, boring, and repetitive. During the day, they'd check the beacon mechanics, test the emergency batteries, refill the diesel generator, and scrape off layers of salt corrosion from the metal interior. At night, they'd read, eat simple meals, and kill time playing cards. It was isolation, but it was expected. No red flags. Then, on the 4th night, Nate woke up around 2 in the morning feeling weird. Not sick, not in pain, just like something was wrong with the atmosphere. The air was heavier than usual, and he said it felt like standing in a room right before a thunderstorm, except the sky was clear and silent outside. He sat up and looked around. It was dark, and then he noticed something. There was no rotation from the beacon. The lighthouse was supposed to send out a sweeping light beam every few seconds, even during maintenance. It was a huge deal if the light failed. He got up and shook Russell awake, and the 2 of them made their way up the narrow spiral staircase to the top of the tower to see what was going on. When they got up there, they found the gears that rotated the beacon were still moving, but the actual light itself wasn't turning. Something was jammed in the mechanism. It was a large, dark piece of cloth, like a blanket or an old coat wedged deep into the gear assembly. The thing was soaked, covered in the slimy, mossy substance, and it smelled like rotting seaweed and mildew. They were both confused. The door had been locked, and the windows were sealed. No wind or birds. It didn't make sense, so they removed the fabric, tossed it outside into the wind, and went back to bed, thinking it was just some bizarre one-off incident. The next night, the exact same thing happened again. Around the same time, just after 2, Nate woke up and saw that the beacon wasn't turning. They went up and found another piece of cloth jammed into the same mechanism. Only this time, it wasn't the same type of fabric. It was smaller. Looked like an old-fashioned scarf or a shawl. It was red, frayed at the edges, and soaked through with what looked like ocean water. It even had tiny crustaceans clinging to it, like it had just come out of the sea. Nate said that was the moment things stopped feeling coincidental. They checked the doors, the windows, the supply closet, but everything was secure. Now they were starting to wonder if someone was messing with them, or worse, if something had gotten into the lighthouse and was deliberately trying to screw with the light. From that night on, they began blocking the stairwell with heavy crates after doing the final check upstairs. They locked the beacon room and the bottom entrance religiously, but on the 7th night, something happened that Nate still refuses to try to explain. He said he was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when he heard Russell whispering from across the room. But he wasn't talking to Nate. He was murmuring to the corner of the room, saying strange, disconnected things, like someone was standing there. Nate leaned up and asked what he was saying, and Russell blinked slowly and looked confused. He told Nate he wasn't saying anything. But later that night, Nate woke again and found Russell sitting at the window, staring down at the rocks below. When he asked what he was doing, Russell said he thought he saw someone standing down there on the rocks the night before, barely visible on the edge of the beacon light. He said it looked like someone was watching them, and then disappeared when the light rotated back. After that, things started spiraling. Russell got weirder every day. He stopped sleeping, stopped talking much, and just stared out the window for hours. Nate asked him if he was okay, and Russell would just mutter about noises in the wall or about hearing voices from inside the stairwell. On the 9th night, they both heard footsteps on the stairs. Not the usual creaking from the wind, but real, slow, deliberate footsteps, one after the other, coming down from the beacon room above. Nate looked over and saw Russell standing at the bottom of the stairs, frozen and staring up. He asked him if he'd gone up there, and Russell just looked at him and said no. Then he asked if Nate had. Neither of them had moved. They stood there listening, but the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. That night, they shoved a dresser in front of the bedroom door and slept with knives under their pillows. On the 11th night, they were woken up again by the beacon failing. This time, when they reached the top of the lighthouse, the beacon room door was wide open. Not just unlocked, not just cracked open, completely swung open like someone had kicked it in. The wind was howling through, and when they got inside, the beacon wasn't just stopped. It had been deliberately tampered with. The bulb was unscrewed and placed upright in the middle of the room. That thing is industrial grade. You can't just twist it off by hand without effort. Nate stared at it, terrified, while Russell just kept muttering that someone had done it. Then, Nate felt something brush against his back. Something cold. He spun around, but no one was there. Russell had gone pale. He just kept pointing at the wall, whispering that he saw a hand come out of the bricks. They ran back down the stairs and locked themselves in the bedroom. Nate didn't sleep at all. Russell started rocking back and forth in the corner, whispering to someone who wasn't there. The next morning, Nate used the emergency sat phone and called for an early pickup, saying there had been a serious mechanical failure. The boat showed up that afternoon, but here's the creepiest part. When they arrived, the crew asked them about the distress call they had made at 2:12 a.m. that morning, but Nate had never made any call. He didn't touch the phone until daylight. The deckhand said they'd received a garbled call that came through with static and a voice saying something about someone being there with them. Then it cut out. Russell didn't speak the entire ride back. He quit the Coast Guard a few months later and never told anyone what really happened out there. Nate still does maintenance duty sometimes, but he says he'll never ever go back to Matinicus Rock. This happened during COVID lockdowns. It was around the point of it where everyone was really getting sick of it and going stir-crazy cooped up in their houses with nothing to do. I was single at the time and was swiping on Tinder and just DMing people while watching movies and shows because really what else was there to do on a weeknight during lockdown? I struck up a conversation with some girl I'd been following on Instagram for years. Her name was Sophia. She goes by Soph. We live in Suffolk County, Long Island, New York, about 20 minutes to half an hour from the Hamptons and like an hour from Montauk. We were bored one night and agreed to hang out. She lives like 5 minutes from me conveniently, so I picked her up. We went for a drive to a nearby park that was closed, and we just drank White Claws there. I immediately got the vibe she was a little rebellious, but like in a cool way. She was down to hop fences and trespass and do things like that. There was a mutual connection very quickly, and within less than an hour, she came up with the idea of driving out to Montauk and walking the cliff walk around the lighthouse. Technically, the lighthouse grounds were closed past sunset. I think they may have been closed in general during lockdown, not 100% sure on that. But right away, I said I was down. I like adventures like that. So we finished our drinks and drove all the way out east to Montauk Point. When we got there, she told me to just park in the lighthouse parking lot. I was a bit hesitant about this, but she seemed pretty confident that there would be no security on a random Tuesday night during lockdown in the off-season. I mean, I didn't see any cars in sight, so I took her word for it. She said she'd done this before, even before COVID. We parked and had another White Claw in the parking lot. I would nervously look around from time to time, making sure no security vehicles were scoping the place out, and she would tell me to relax. We eventually started walking over to the lighthouse. Seeing a lighthouse at night so closely and just staring up at it, it's so cool, but it's also a bit eerie. Can't explain it, but there's something kind of liminal about it. Soph led the way. I guess it was a bit out of the way of the actual entrance, just so we wouldn't be walking directly into the light and potentially exposing ourselves. This was my first time ever at the Montauk Lighthouse. She led us straight to the cliffside behind the lighthouse that had a bunch of rocks forming a trail of sorts called the Cliff Walk. We were navigating solely with our flashlights. Maybe there were supposed to be lights on down there, but that night, mostly everything was off besides a few lights by the front entrance and of course the lighthouse light itself. As we started making our way around the cliff walk, being mindful of our steps, eventually, Soph, who was walking behind me now, said my name. I turned to her, and she was pointing her light behind her, exposing someone behind us also on the rocks. With both of us shining our lights over, it was easier to make him out. He was wearing a coat with a hood over his head. He looked like he was a black guy, but we couldn't tell how old or anything else about him. I called over asking if he worked here, and he didn't answer, but he also wasn't moving either. I followed it up with, "We're gonna leave, sorry." I was mostly nervous that it was a security worker or something and that we were gonna get in trouble, but then the guy said something to us. He said, "Y'all wanna buy some coke?" Finding out that wasn't a security guard, but simply a random guy was not a relief at all. If anything, it was more nerve-wracking, because why the hell was this creepy guy following us? Why was he even here? I said, "No man, we're good," and motioned for Soph to keep moving. I let her go in front of me, and we pressed forward. As we walked along, the guy started moving too. He didn't follow up with anything, like, "You sure?" He remained silent, but he seemed to move at the same pace as us. Soph or I would glance back with our lights every so often, and he'd be the same distance away. It was the strangest, most uncomfortable thing. It made the rest of the experience tense as could be. We made it to the end of the cliff walk and hurried through the grass back to the car. That guy from before was still following, basically matching our speed. We heard him call something over to us. It sounded like, "Where are you going?" This guy was obviously looking for trouble. I didn't want to instigate anything, so I didn't respond, and I told Soph not to as well. We walked side by side quickly to the car, and that's when we noticed two more guys walking over from behind us as well. I didn't want to run because that would definitely lead to them chasing us, but one of the other guys called something over to us as well. I didn't hear what it was. We got to the car and hurried inside, and Soph and I screamed when we both realized the three guys were right on top of the car now. I locked the car immediately, I swear, only seconds before two of them tried opening different doors. I put the car in reverse, basically the only direction where I wouldn't be hitting any of them with the car. They kicked and hit my car as I reversed out, but they didn't bother chasing us once we were in motion. On the ride back, I know that both of our hearts were racing, and after the adrenaline wore off, we were both quiet. We called it a night after I dropped her off. We ended up hanging out many times after that, and we're still in touch today. But honestly, that night still unsettles me. It was too close for comfort to something bad happening. My friends think it was a gang, Crips maybe. Whatever it was, I have no interest going back out there at night. My name is Gregory. This was a story my old friend Ian has told me many times that happened to him many moons ago. I asked him to give me a detailed version in writing recently that he gave me permission to share online because I always found it so unsettling. Ian was one of those guys you only had to meet once to know he was the real deal. 50-something, solid build, weathered skin from decades working in salt air. He worked in marine salvage and coastal infrastructure. Basically, when something broke near the water, Ian was one of the people you'd call to go fix it. But he wasn't just a contractor. He'd been a diver, a ship technician, even spent time doing remote inspections for the government. The guy had seen just about everything, so when he told me this story, I didn't doubt it. Not for a second. He said it happened back in 2013, when he got hired by a small county up in Washington state to do a structural inspection of an old decommissioned lighthouse. The county had inherited the property years earlier and didn't know what to do with it. Developers wanted to tear it down, historians wanted to preserve it, and no one wanted to pay for it either. So Ian's job was simple: go there alone, assess the place inside and out, and figure out whether it was even safe to restore. The lighthouse was on a remote rock island about an hour off the mainland. Not a big island either, just a hunk of stone and dirt maybe 300 feet wide, with nothing but the lighthouse itself, a generator shed, and some rusted out old scaffolding from decades past. The place hadn't been used in years, and it wasn't exactly a tourist destination. There weren't even any docks, just a little ledge where a small Coast Guard boat could offload someone at high tide. Ian packed light, food for 4 days, a sleeping bag, some tools, a clipboard, and a two-way marine radio. The plan was simple. He'd get dropped off Monday morning, do a full walkthrough by Wednesday, and call in for pickup Thursday afternoon. He didn't think twice about going alone. He'd done this sort of thing dozens of times before. When he first got there, the place was quiet. Cold, cloudy, but calm. The air had that usual mix of salt, metal, and decay you expect from something that's been sitting abandoned for decades. The lighthouse itself was tall, maybe 50 feet, built in the early 1900s. It had the classic spiral staircase inside, which led up to the beacon room. That glass lens hadn't worked in decades, but the structure itself was solid. Ian did his usual safety checks: support beams, stair integrity, window fittings. The floorboards on the lower level were warped but walkable. The second floor was a storage room, which was empty except for some rusted metal cabinets. The third floor had a tiny sleeping quarter that hadn't been used in decades. He ended up laying out his sleeping bag on the ground floor near the generator room where it was warmer and out of the wind. The first night was uneventful. It was quiet, like too quiet, Ian said. You don't notice how noisy the world usually is until it's not. There were no birds, no insects, not even the sound of waves slapping against the rocks outside. Just wind, and even that was soft. On the second day, the fog rolled in thick. Ian woke up to a completely white world outside. You couldn't see more than 5 feet beyond the window. He said it wasn't like any fog he'd seen before. It was so dense it looked solid, like a wall, but he didn't think much of it. That area got heavy fog often. He spent most of the day taking notes on the upper stairwell. That's when he noticed the first weird thing. Halfway up the staircase to the beacon room, there was a maintenance closet built into the wall. He'd tried to open it on day one, but the hinges were so corroded it wouldn't budge. But now it was open a crack. Not much, maybe an inch, but enough that you could tell it had been moved. He figured the moisture in the air had caused it to shift, but he didn't like it. The inside of the closet was pitch black, and when he pushed the door wider, he saw something sitting in the back corner. A wooden box, maybe the size of a lunchbox, and it was covered in a kind of damp moss, like it had been underwater recently. He didn't open it. He just shut the door again and made a note to report it. That night, something woke him up. He said it wasn't a sound exactly, but more so the absence of sound, like everything had stopped. And then he heard footsteps on the metal stairs above him. At first he thought an animal got inside, but then he realized they weren't descending. The steps were going upward. Whatever was in the tower was climbing. He turned on his flashlight and stared at the stairwell entrance, waiting, but nothing happened. Eventually the sound stopped and the silence returned. The next day he searched the whole place, top to bottom. He checked every room and every closet. He even climbed onto the roof, but there was nothing. No animals or anything out of the ordinary, except that box. It was now sitting outside the closet, halfway into the stairwell, still covered in moss. He said he stood there for a long time staring at it, trying to decide what to do. Eventually he picked it up. It was heavier than he expected. The wood was bloated with moisture, but the lid didn't open. It was nailed shut. He didn't want to mess with it too much, so he left it at the base of the stairs and went outside for air. That's when he noticed something else. There were footprints in the dirt around the lighthouse. Bare footprints. Not boots or shoes, but bare wet feet, leading from the north side of the building toward the cliff edge and then stopping. The footprints didn't circle back. They were just 10 or 12 barefoot impressions in the mud that ended at a sheer drop into the sea. He said he stood there for a long time trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone had come ashore, but the only boat scheduled was his return ride, and that wasn't for another day. He considered using the radio to call for an early pickup, but the fog was so thick that by then they probably wouldn't even be able to navigate back. He went inside and locked every door and hatch, and then he wedged the stairwell shut with an iron pipe, and he tried to sleep. That night was worse. Around 1:30 a.m., he heard the door to the upper beacon room slam shut violently. He said the force shook dust loose from the ceiling. Then came the knocking. 3 slow knocks on the inside wall of the tower. Not the front door or window, but the wall itself. Like someone standing just inches behind the plaster, tapping their knuckles against the brick. Ian didn't move. He lay there frozen until the sound stopped. When the sun came up, he checked everything again. The box was gone, and the closet door was fully open. At this point, it was abundantly clear he wasn't alone there, so Ian used the radio and called for immediate extraction. The fog was still heavy, but he told them it was a medical issue. They said they'd try to get a boat there within a few hours. He packed everything and waited by the landing ledge. The fog didn't clear. In fact, it apparently got thicker. He sat there for nearly 7 hours, unable to see anything more than a few feet in front of him. The sun was going down, and the air had gotten cold. He heard someone walking behind him in the gravel near the base of the lighthouse, but when he turned around, there was no one there, or he simply just couldn't see who it was through the fog. He ran to the edge of the cliff and stayed there until he heard the boat horn in the distance. They pulled him out just after dark. The deckhand who helped him on board asked why he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Ian told him that the lighthouse was unsafe and should be sealed off. He filed a brief report back at the office. He said the structure was compromised and not fit for entry, but he never mentioned the footsteps or the box. He told me he didn't because he genuinely considered the possibility that he simply was losing his mind in isolation. This was around the end of what Ian sent me in writing. Ian never went back to that lighthouse. He wrapped up his remaining projects that year and quietly phased himself out of field work. Within a year, he stopped taking contracts altogether, said he wanted to focus on dry land from then on. When I asked if it was because of the lighthouse, he just shrugged and said he'd seen enough out there. I pressed him once, just once, about what he really thought happened on that island. He looked me dead in the eye and said something that kind of stuck with me ever since. He said, "Some places are meant to be left alone. They just need time and silence." That was all he'd say. I tried to look into the lighthouse myself a while back, but I couldn't find much. The coordinates he'd scribbled in his notes don't point to any listed structure. The county records mention a decommissioned tower somewhere off the coast, but there's no official name and no accessible history. It's like he was never really there in the first place. And that's the part that unsettles me most. Not what Ian said, but what nobody else ever did. I don't honestly know whether I hope Ian really was just for whatever reason going crazy on that island or not. I used to work as a custodian at a middle school for almost 5 years, and I was usually on the overnight shift. I would clock in around 10 at night and stay until right before the sun came up, when the buses started pulling in. At first, I actually liked the job. I didn't have to deal with the kids running down the hallways, teachers complaining about stuff, or anyone really. The quiet didn't bother me, and I liked being left alone to do my work. But as time went on, I started to notice how different the school felt at night compared to during the day. It wasn't just quiet, it felt dead. The building creaked and groaned like it was breathing, and when you're the only person in there, even the smallest sound will set you on edge. You'd hear a locker pop open on its own, or the pipes knocking in the walls, and your brain would make you think it was footsteps. I learned to ignore a lot of that, but one part of the school I never really got used to was the basement. The school was old, built in the 1950s, and the basement ran underneath half of it. It wasn't finished nicely like the classrooms. It was a concrete maze of storage rooms and long, narrow halls with pipes and wires hanging overhead. Some of the rooms were full of old desks, some had boxes of outdated textbooks, others had broken furniture stacked up. It always smelled damp and musty down there. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered when they even worked at all. A lot of the time, you had to bring a flashlight just to see where you were going. When I first started, one of the older custodians told me to avoid the basement unless I absolutely had to go down there. He said it wasn't worth the trouble and joked that it was haunted. I laughed along, but even in that first week, I noticed how uneasy I felt in that part of the building. It was like stepping into a different world compared to the bright hallways upstairs. There were nights when I would pass the door to the basement and feel a chill just from looking at it, but usually I didn't have to go down there. So I avoided it whenever possible. One night, about 2 years into the job, I had a list of tasks taped to my cart, and one of them was to bring up a set of folding chairs for an event. I groaned as soon as I saw it, because the only place those chairs were kept was the basement. I remember standing at the top of the basement stairwell door for a good minute just debating if I could ask my supervisor if it could wait till morning, but I didn't want to look lazy, so I grabbed my flashlight and opened the heavy door. The stairwell echoed with every step I took. like my boots were way too loud. I got to the bottom and flipped the switch, but only a couple of the overhead lights came on. They left most of the hallway in darkness. I swear it smelled like wet cement down there. I turned on my flashlight and started walking. The chairs were supposed to be in the second storage room on the left. The first room was full of old desks piled all the way to the ceiling. The second door was half rusted, and it squealed like nails on a chalkboard when I pulled it open. Inside, the room smelled like dust and wood polish. The folding chairs were stacked against the wall in uneven piles. I bent down and started pulling them out, trying to carry as many as I could at once so I wouldn't have to make so many trips. I had just picked up 4 when I froze. From somewhere out in the hallway, I heard a soft dragging sound, like someone was slowly sliding their shoe across the floor. I held my breath, still bent over with the chairs in my arms, listening as hard as I could. The sound stopped. I straightened up and peeked my head out into the hallway, shining the flashlight both ways. The beam cut through the dark, but there was nothing there. My heart was thumping in my ears. I stood there for what felt like forever before finally telling myself it was probably just the pipes, or maybe I had shifted a chair without realizing it. I carried the first load out into the hallway and toward the stairs. As I walked, I suddenly felt a cold draft against my face. It was so out of place that it made me stop mid-step. The basement was always warm and stale, with no windows and no moving air. This felt like standing next to an open freezer. I shined my light up and down the hallway, but nothing looked different. I shook it off, set the chairs at the bottom of the stairs, and went back for more. When I walked into the storage room again, something felt off. The stack of chairs looked different somehow, like they had shifted while I was gone. I frowned at them, trying to remember exactly how they'd been leaning. I finally told myself I was just being paranoid and picked up another load. This time, as I turned to leave, I heard it again, a thump followed by a scraping sound. It came from farther down the basement hallway. My flashlight beam shook in my hand as I aimed it that way. About 20 feet down, one of the classroom doors that should have been closed tight was cracked open. My stomach dropped. I knew I hadn't touched that door. The school was locked up every night, and no one was supposed to be there except me. I stood frozen in the doorway of the storage room, staring at that cracked door. Every part of me screamed to drop the chairs and run upstairs, but I just stood there. I told myself maybe the door had come loose, or maybe when I opened another door, the air pressure had shifted. I clung to those excuses like a lifeline. I carried the chairs quickly to the stairwell, then came back with my flashlight in one hand, empty-handed this time. The cracked door was still there, open just enough for someone to peek out. My throat went dry. I crept toward it slowly, each step echoing. When I was close, I called out, "Hello, anyone down here?" My voice cracked, and it sounded small in the big empty basement. No answer. I swallowed hard, then pushed the door open fast with my free hand and shined the flashlight inside. The room was empty, just shelves of dusty science equipment, boxes stacked high, cobwebs in the corners. I stepped inside for a second, heart racing, listening for any sound. That's when I heard it again, a dragging shuffle, but this time it was behind me in the hallway. I spun around and pointed the flashlight, with the beam cutting down the corridor. Nothing, just shadows and concrete, but I felt it, that heavy pressure you get when you know you're being watched. My skin prickled all over. I didn't care about the chairs anymore. I backed up slowly, keeping the flashlight aimed down the hallway, and made my way toward the stairwell. When I got to the stairs, I grabbed the chairs I'd left and carried them up 2 steps at a time. I didn't stop until I was back in the main hallway upstairs, gasping for breath. I leaned against the wall, sweating even though the school was cold. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe it had been rats or water pipes, but I couldn't explain the cracked door. I locked the stairwell door behind me, even though I wasn't supposed to, and I didn't go back down for the rest of the night. A week later, I was mopping the hallway right above the basement stairs when I heard it again. 3 loud bangs, evenly spaced, like someone hitting the wall with their fist. The mop slipped out of my hand, water dripping onto the tiles. I froze and listened. Then I heard the basement door rattle like someone had shoved it from the other side. My blood went cold. I didn't open it. I stood there, gripping the mop handle until the sound stopped. After that, I refused to go down into the basement alone. If anything needed to come up, I'd wait until another custodian was there. I never told the others what I heard, because I knew they'd either laugh or tell me it was the so-called ghost. But I know what I felt, and I know what I heard. To this day, when I think about those slow dragging footsteps behind me, I feel sick to my stomach. I worked as a custodian at a high school for 3 years. I was the newest guy on the team, so most of the time I got stuck with the overnight shifts. The building was huge, 4 floors and 2 gyms, and at night, when it was empty, it felt like a giant maze. The rule was to go floor by floor, room by room, turning off lights, emptying trash, and locking doors. It usually took the whole night to cover everything, and if you tried to rush, you'd miss something. One Friday night, I was working alone because one of the other custodians had called out sick. Normally, we worked in pairs, so I wasn't used to being the only one on duty. At first, the shift was normal. I started on the first floor, emptying trash cans, wiping down surfaces, and mopping the hallways. The lights in some of the old corridors flickered, which made the shadows jump around, but I told myself it was just the building settling. Around midnight, I made my way up to the 3rd floor. That floor always gave me a bad feeling because it was quieter than the others. It had a lot of older classrooms that weren't used anymore, some permanently locked, and others were just storage rooms filled with dusty books, broken furniture, and old lab equipment. As I walked down the hallway, I passed the lockers. The metallic click of the doors and the echo of my boots against the tiles made me jump a few times. I kept reminding myself it was normal. I was halfway through mopping one of the main hallways when I noticed a door about 20 feet away was open. That struck me immediately because I had already checked all the rooms earlier in the evening, and every door had been locked. My first instinct was to walk past it quickly and ignore it, but something made me stop. I set my mop against the wall and walked over slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. The door was one of those old wooden classroom doors with a square glass window. I pushed it open slowly, shining my flashlight inside. The room looked empty. The desks were stacked along the walls and boxes were in the corners. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance, but then I noticed that one of the boxes near the back wall had been moved. It was tilted, not lined up with the others, and there were scuff marks on the floor, like it had been dragged across the tiles. My stomach sank. I knew I had closed that door earlier, and I knew I hadn't moved that box. I told myself it was probably nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me because I was tired. I pulled the door closed and went back to mopping, but my mind kept wandering to that room. I kept thinking I should check the windows, maybe a student had snuck in somehow, but all the windows were locked from the inside, and the hallway doors were locked as well. I tried to shake the feeling of being watched and focused on the cleaning. After finishing that hallway, I went down to the stairwell to head to the 2nd floor. As I walked past that same classroom again, my heart nearly stopped. The door was wide open. My breath caught in my throat. I knew I had shut it before. I slowly stepped closer. I peeked inside, and the room looked normal, except the box was now moved to the center of the floor. My pulse was racing. I whispered, "Hello? Who's in here?" My voice sounded tiny in the emptiness of the building. I waited, but there was silence. And then from the back of the room, I heard slow, deep breathing. Not a gust of wind or a pipe. It was someone trying to be quiet, but making sure I could hear it. I tried to convince myself it was a student hiding, playing a prank. But how would they have gotten in? I was the only one who was supposed to be there, and all the doors were locked. I slammed the door shut and ran down the hallway to the stairwell. My heart was hammering, and sweat ran down my back. I stayed pressed against the stairwell door, listening. I debated calling my supervisor, even though I hated bothering him in the middle of the night. Finally, I did. When he picked up, I told him what was happening, trying to keep my voice steady. He said he would be there in 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes felt like hours. I stayed as far away from that room as possible, peeking over my shoulder every few seconds. Finally, he arrived. We went back up together. He had a big flashlight and walked straight into the classroom. The box was still in the middle of the floor. We checked everywhere, the closets, under the tables, behind the desks. There was nothing. He suggested I was just tired or imagining things. I didn't argue, but I knew what I had heard. That slow, heavy breathing. I tried to finish the rest of my shift with him there, but I kept glancing at that classroom. The hallway felt colder and more oppressive than ever. Even sweeping and mopping didn't distract me. Every time I passed a locker, I expected it to swing open. Every shadow seemed like a person standing just out of view. Weeks later, when I worked with another custodian, he told me that years ago, a student had been caught hiding in that classroom overnight. They had snuck in to play a prank, but it scared the staff so much that they never used that room again. It made sense, but it didn't explain the breathing I heard that night. There was no one else in the school. I finished the shift and left, but every time I thought about it, my stomach twisted. I started taking extra precautions. I made sure all the doors were locked as I passed. I kept my flashlight pointed at the floor and stayed near the stairwell if I had to pass that hallway. Months later, I had another overnight shift alone. I avoided that third floor for as long as possible. When I finally had to go up, I moved as quickly as I could. I kept thinking I'd hear it again. The feeling of being watched didn't go away. Even when I was in a room far from that classroom, I felt like eyes were on me. Every creak of the floor made me jump. I finished the shift and left quickly, never looking back. I refused to work that floor alone again. Even years later, I avoided it whenever I could. I never found out if it had been a student hiding or something else, but I'll never forget the sound of that breathing, coming from a classroom that should have been empty. I can still hear it in my head sometimes. I worked as a night custodian at an old high school for 2 years. The worst part of the job was always the auditorium. It was massive, with 3 levels of seating, a big stage, and long heavy curtains that hung from the ceiling. During the day, it looked normal, but at night, when the building was empty, it felt like stepping into a completely different place. Even with the lights on, there were shadows in every corner that seemed darker than they should be. Sound carried strangely in there. If you dropped a broom, the echo would stretch and bounce, making it hard to tell exactly where the sound came from. Most nights, I saved the auditorium for last because I hated going in there. There was just something about it that always made my skin crawl. Near the end of winter one year, I had to clean it earlier than usual because there was going to be a play the next morning. I arrived around midnight, dragging my cart behind me. The side door creaked loudly as I opened it, and when it slammed shut behind me, the echo traveled across the empty room. I started by sweeping the aisles between the seats. The chairs were old, metal folding seats bolted to the floor in some rows, and in other rows, they were loose. As I pushed the broom, I listened to the scraping sound echo off the walls and ceiling. After a few minutes, I thought I heard something else. It was faint at first, like a soft rustling from the stage. I froze, thinking maybe a prop had fallen over, but when I looked, the stage was empty. I shook my head and told myself it was nothing. I continued sweeping. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time it was more distinct, the sound of slow footsteps across the stage. I stopped sweeping and looked toward the stage. I could see the stacked props in the corners. Nothing moved, but the sound was real. My breathing became shallow. I slowly climbed the steps onto the stage, shining the flashlight behind the curtains. There were ropes, pulleys, old chairs, and painted scenery stacked against the walls. Everything was covered in dust, and the beam of my light made it dance like it was moving. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was nearby. I backed off the stage, telling myself it was just the building settling, maybe a mouse in the rafters, but the feeling didn't go away. I continued sweeping down the aisles, trying to finish as fast as possible. My mind kept going back to the stage. The sound of those slow footsteps repeated in my head, even though I couldn't hear them anymore. I finished sweeping the lower level and started mopping. As I pushed the mop through the rows, I thought I saw a shadow move across the second tier of seats. I moved my flashlight toward the seats, but nothing was there. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light. I kept my back to the wall as I moved, feeling as if someone were behind me. I had nearly finished mopping the main floor when I heard it again. A whisper. I couldn't make out words, but it was low, and it was coming from the balcony seats above me. My heart was now hammering, my flashlight's beam trembling in my hands. I wanted to run, but I didn't. I had to finish the job. I told myself it was someone outside, or maybe a janitor who had forgotten something, but I knew I was alone. I kept mopping slowly, my ears straining. The whispering continued, almost like it was moving closer. I tried calling out, but I was so nervous that my voice sounded weak. There was no answer, only the echo of my voice. I finished mopping the main floor and started cleaning the stage itself. The steps up felt endless, and every time I moved my flashlight, I thought I saw something just at the edge of the beam. Sometimes it was a flicker of a shadow, sometimes it was just my imagination. When I reached the stage, I looked over the edge of the main floor. The seats stretched back in the darkness. I shined the flashlight into the balcony, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure sitting there. Just a silhouette. But when I blinked, it was gone. I told myself it was a chair or a coat, but the feeling didn't leave me. I started dusting and moving props, trying to focus on something physical. The whispering came again, much clearer this time. It sounded like someone speaking my name, almost directly behind me. I spun around so fast that the flashlight slipped in my hands. The stage was empty. Nothing. The props were still stacked in the same place, and the curtains didn't move. But I knew I hadn't imagined the voice. I backed away slowly, with my heart racing, and I moved toward the side door. I stopped at the edge of the stage and listened. I could hear soft footsteps on the upper levels, moving slowly across the balcony. I told myself it was impossible. The auditorium was locked. No one else should have been there. The footsteps continued, stopping and starting as if someone were pacing and watching me. I finally ran to the door, grabbed the handle, and pulled it open. The cold night air hit me like a wall, and I felt relief, but I could still hear the faint echo of footsteps above, fading away slowly. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely lock the door behind me. I leaned against it, catching my breath, feeling the sweat running down my forehead. I didn't go back inside that night. The next morning, I tried to tell another custodian about what happened, and he laughed at me, saying it's an old building and probably just settles or something. But I'm not convinced. That whispering voice and my name being called so softly and deliberately, and the footsteps pacing above me, I felt them in the air around me. Weeks later, I learned that years ago, a drama teacher had died suddenly in that auditorium during rehearsal. Heart attack right on stage in front of students. People said sometimes you could still hear him walking the stage at night, or hear whispers in the seats. I tried to convince myself it's just a story, that the sounds were normal for an old building. But the way that voice whispered my name and the footsteps echoed, I could never forget it. Maybe I was going crazy, I don't know. After that night, I refused to clean the auditorium. I quit that job not long after, but sometimes, even when other people were in the building, I would feel the same cold pressure in the auditorium, and feel that same way about being watched. I know what I experienced was real, at least real to me. I've never had any kind of schizophrenic episodes or anything like that, so this whole thing still just baffles me to this day.
My two kids, Sam and Robbie, are twins. They're 6 years old. A year ago, we were living at our old house, but something happened that led to us moving. It's a long, awful story. I lived in my old house for 4 years. My wife Carol and I got married while I was living there, and we had our kids there too. The neighborhood was slowly changing, and not for the better, but even still, we originally planned on staying in that house for the foreseeable future, until this happened. We were a corner house, and the house behind us on the intersecting road was covered by a bunch of tall trees and bushes, so we hardly ever saw those neighbors. Our neighbor on the right, however, his name was Steve. He had just moved there less than a year ago at the time. I had only ever spoken with him a couple of times. Both times I could hardly understand what he said because of his heavy accent, and he just overall didn't seem like the friendliest guy. 2 of his windows overlooked our backyard. There wasn't much privacy, but whatever rooms the 2 windows were that overlooked the backyard, I had never seen the lights on in either of them, so I always assumed it was an unused guest room or something of that nature. One day in the summertime, Sam and Robbie were playing in the backyard in their blow-up pool and with their water guns while I was outside doing yard work. There came a certain point where I was walking towards the detached garage, and then I saw Steve next door at his window for a second. Only half a second after noticing him did he turn and walk away from the window. It was slightly odd for sure, but I left it alone. Later that day, as the sun was going down, the kids went back outside to play again. It was a very hot day, so they went back in their blow-up pool while Carol and I were in the kitchen as she was making dinner. Then the kids' laughter went quiet for a while, and suddenly Robbie came inside and said there was a flashing light from the neighbor's window. I had to follow him to the backyard to ask him to show me what he was talking about. He pointed to one of Steve's upstairs windows that overlooked the backyard, and he said there was a white light that kept coming from that window. I right away assumed the worst, and asked the twins if it looked like a camera flash. They both said yes. I told them it's time to dry off and come inside. So I helped them dry themselves, and then brought them in, where I went to tell Carol about this. She right away assumed the worst just like me. She said I should go next door and knock on Steve's door. So I did. But when I did, he never answered the door. His car was even in the driveway, so he had to be home. After a few attempts at knocking and ringing the bell, I gave up and went back to my house. I told Carol he wasn't opening up, which made what the kids said seem even more credible. While we couldn't prove that the white light the kids were seeing was a camera flash, it sure did sound like it, and it was concerning to hear. Some time passed, maybe even weeks, before one night when Carol and I were in the bedroom, we heard our side gate being quietly opened and closed outside. Carol wanted me to go check outside, so I stepped out into the backyard and looked around. I had on all the lights as I searched. I found nothing and nobody, but I noticed the lights in Steve's backyard were on. I went over to look over the fence into his yard, and I nearly jumped out of my skin when he came up to the fence from the other side and asked if I needed something. I asked him if he'd seen or heard anyone sneaking through our yard. He said no. I took this time to also ask him bluntly if he had by chance been watching my kids, as they thought someone was at his window taking pictures of them playing in the pool. His reaction to this was a bit suspicious. He acted overly offended to my asking this, almost yelling at me for such an accusation. Again, without proof, I couldn't, nor did I want to, start issues with a neighbor. I apologized and went back inside. Carol was not happy about this, saying he's full of shit. The next incident didn't happen until another few weeks later. This time it was in the middle of the night when we were asleep. I woke up to Carol shaking me in a panic. I looked around the room confused at first, but then when I heard the kids screaming from their room, I exploded from the bed and ran downstairs to the kids' room. Robbie was awake and crying, and I found out a few seconds later that his crying and screaming had awoken Sammy, who was crying and screaming in reaction to him. Robbie said there was someone outside the window a second ago, and there was a camera flash from the window. I got goosebumps, but I also felt my blood begin to boil. All I could say was, what did he look like? He said he didn't see. I brought the kids up to our room to sleep in the bed with us. With the lights off, I peeked out our bedroom window to look across at Steve's unlit house next door. I looked at each window of his house, and I found him. He, just like me, was peeking out one of the upstairs windows, in that same room that overlooks the backyard. I stormed outside next door and rang his doorbell like 15 times. He never opened his door. I did call the police just to make a report on Steve. That way, if any future reports were made about him from other people, maybe the police department would look into him. I never saw him again. Sometimes I'd sit out front waiting to see him outside, but he'd clearly avoid coming outside when I'd be out there. Because of this, we ended up moving within a month to a new house in a different but nearby town, which has proven to be a better place to raise the kids anyway. About 3 months ago, I moved into an apartment with 2 other women so I could attend college. There's a list of things that make the building we live in not that great. For example, most apartment rooms face the corridor, where people from the same floor as you will constantly walk left and right to get in or out of the building. So if you keep your windows open, anyone pacing outside can see into your room. But considering I spend most of my time at college, and the girls I live with and most of the neighbors are really nice, the things on that list don't really bother me that much. A few nights ago, while getting ready to go to bed, I could hear music playing from somewhere, mostly pop songs from the 2000s. Since we live in a student-friendly city full of frat houses and the likes, I thought nothing of it. There were probably a bunch of parties going on and the sound was coming from one of them, or maybe it was just some drunk friends listening to it on the street. I got into bed and let a random video play on my phone so I could fall asleep, as I often do. But as I was starting to doze off, I started to hear drilling noises. At first, I thought I was just sleepy and hearing things, or maybe it was coming from my phone, but I paused the video and listened closely. There was definitely someone using a drill somewhere nearby. I got up and walked around the apartment feeling confused. It was around 11 p.m., so there was no way that someone could be working still. The sound was louder at my bedroom window, so I opened it to check, and quickly realized that it was coming from the neighboring apartment, the one that's closest to my window. At that moment, I realized that music was also coming from there. No one lives in that specific apartment, so my confusion only grew. But then I figured maybe someone had planned to rent it, talked it over with the landlord, and he ordered for something in it to be fixed. Still, the fact that they were doing it so late into a Thursday felt really strange. I went back to trying to sleep, but they wouldn't stop making noise. I was texting a friend and eventually started complaining about it, sending him audios and even a video directed at the window that all the noise was coming from. He said I should call the police because there was no way it was legal for someone to be doing this, especially in a building full of apartments. I decided against it since I just wanted to get some rest, and it was already past midnight by then. I forced myself to sleep through the drilling sounds, but a little past 1 in the morning, I woke up again, this time to hammering. Feeling stressed, but not enough to take action just yet, I tried to sleep once more, only to wake up again. This time, I didn't even check what time it was. I was totally fed up. So I just put on a robe and made my way to confront whoever it was. The window to the apartment was open, so I decided to talk to those people from there. The window was located above the stairs though, so I would have to go down a few steps to get into view, and I'd look even shorter being seen from there. But that was the last thing on my mind. As soon as I got to the window, I felt most of the courage leave me. In that room, there were 4 men, who all seemed to be around their 30s or 40s, and they all stopped whatever they were doing to look at me. Now, only the song coming from the radio could be heard, and somehow it felt chilling to have all those other noises stop so abruptly, because even though that's everything I wanted just seconds earlier, I definitely didn't want to be the one thing these 4 men were focused on. Another thing that bothered me, but I didn't think about until the next day, was those men's peculiar choice of music. It just felt creepy to realize that middle-aged men were listening to stuff that teenagers or even preteens would be listening to. Anyway, none of them looked shocked to see me. They just had puzzled, "What's that?" looks. Remembering why I was there in the first place, I said, "Excuse me, it's pretty late and most people here have work early in the morning. If it's not too much to ask, can you guys do this some other time?" Now, mind you, I'm a pretty short and puny 19-year-old who didn't even think to put on something other than a robe. So when 2 of those 40-something-year-old men came to the window and towered over me, looking up and down at my body, almost like predators, I froze up and felt the hairs in the back of my neck stand up. They were both sweaty and had their mouths agape, and one of them had a hammer that looked quite heavy in his hand. They started smiling in a sick, twisted way, and I felt a sudden urge to throw up. Extremely unsettled, I started slowly making my way back to my apartment, not taking my eyes off the men, feeling like they might try to grab me when I got to the last step of the stairs and close enough to the window. As soon as I was out of their view, I dashed to my front door, got inside, and locked it. One of the girls who lives with me was out of town that night, and I presumed the other one was asleep, since she hadn't seen my text on our group chat asking them if anyone had moved into that apartment. I got back into my room and didn't hear any tools again. In reality, even the radio seemed to have been turned off. I wasn't really sure how to feel about that because now I wasn't angry, just disgusted and creeped out. I know I should have called the cops by then, but I was just too stressed to deal with that any longer. Checking the time, it was about 2:15 now. I got into bed again, tricking myself into thinking I wasn't scared, just craving some sleep. Eventually, I passed out. I woke up in the middle of the night again. This time it was around 3:30, and I could hear no sounds coming from the apartment. Everything was quiet, and that quickly started to bother me. It was too quiet. I had to have heard or felt something in order to wake up. The silence was making me uneasy, and I had a feeling that someone might have been on the other side of my closed window. I tried not to think about it, but I couldn't get a peaceful sleep after that. The next morning, as I was going out, I went past the same window and noticed that it was closed. It was as if this previous night had never even happened. But I asked the girl who was home with me if she heard anything. She said she had woken up several times during the night, but couldn't get up and do something about it due to sleep paralysis. Either way, that confirmed I wasn't delusional. Those people really were there. But then, how did they have the keys to the building and that apartment? Why did it seem like they didn't want to be seen during the day? What were they thinking of doing to me or maybe any passerby? It's been a week now, and thankfully I haven't seen those men again. Still, I have no idea who they were or what they were doing, and I'm honestly scared to even think about the possibility that they might come back, or still be lurking around somewhere. I live in a pretty basic suburban town on Long Island, New York. My girlfriend Sarah and I recently started renting a small house perfect for 2 to 4. We have a decent sized backyard and our house is on a very quiet street. One side of our house has a water drainage basin, as the county calls it, which is just a bunch of trees surrounding a sump. On the other side is our neighbor Kyle, who lives with his wife. They're a bit older in their 60s and quiet. Then directly across the street is a little patch of woods that's in front of another water drainage basin. So for people who like privacy out front, our house is perfect. But then there's the backyard. Kyle's house is blocked off by some bushes that the landlord planted years ago. So besides the house directly behind us over the fence, there's no other houses that could see into the yard. However, that one house looking into our backyard was all that it's taken to genuinely make Sarah and I uncomfortable. As I'm writing this, it's currently the fall, so we've been doing fall cleanup the past few weeks in the front and backyard. I started noticing anytime we were out there were these 2 people standing at the upstairs window of the house behind us. It was a middle-aged man and woman. When I'd look up to that window, they'd keep looking and watching me. It got really uncomfortable to the point we'd pretend not to notice it, but we could only stomach doing this for so long. The leaves kept falling day by day, and the fall cleaning would need to continue. Sarah wouldn't want to be in the yard anymore because she was getting so creeped out at those 2 people who would watch us out the window without fail. So one foggy day while raking, I looked up at the window and once again, the 2 were standing at the big rectangular window. I decided to wave at them, see if they'd wave back. After a few seconds of smiling and waving, they didn't move. No reaction. But I could feel their stares and I could see their eyeballs looking at me. I turned away from the window and tried to continue raking, but after sneaking a peek back at the window a couple minutes later and seeing them still there, I felt too awkward and weird being out there. I went inside. Sarah said we should go over and introduce ourselves. At first, I was hesitant of that, but I was persuaded to walk around the block with her to that house and ring the bell. We expected one of those people at the window to answer the door, but instead, the door cracked open, just enough to see half of a person's head. It didn't look like either of those people who were always at the window. It was also super dark in the house, to the point that it looked incredibly ominous and uncanny staring at half of that person's face. This guy looked a lot younger, like in his 20s. Sarah and I tried to be friendly and introduce ourselves. The guy seemed very closed off though, and not interested in speaking. He had a very "what do you need" type of attitude about him, and when I asked if he lives with anyone else here like his parents, he said no. I mentioned the man and woman who were always at the window upstairs, and the guy on the other side of the door said he doesn't know who I'm talking about. Sarah and I felt really unsettled, so we just left. But weirdly, as we walked down the walkway back to the sidewalk, I noticed the guy behind the door was still peering half of his face through the cracked open door. I'm sure he watched us walk away until we were out of sight. That interaction was weirder and creepier than we were expecting. When we got back home, I went upstairs to our room. The upstairs of our house is only our master bedroom and the bathroom. It has 2 windows. One of the windows looks over to that house over the fence, and I looked out the window to see those 2 people looking out the window again. And even at this distance, I felt like they were staring right at me. I shut the blinds and went down to tell Sarah. We agreed it was time to plant some arborvitaes to block their window from view. The only problem is it's already the fall and it's too late to plant any kinds of trees. We have to make it through winter. After a few days of not looking outside the bedroom window or going into the backyard, one night we heard a strange knocking sound from downstairs. I told Sarah to wait in bed while I went downstairs. The knocking got louder, and I quickly discovered it wasn't the sound of knocking on one of the doors, but rather on the glass of one of the backyard windows. The blinds of it were of course shut because we didn't want those creepy people looking into our living room at night. I approached it, and yes, it was 100% a fist knocking on the glass. I considered saying, "Who's there?" but I froze and I was too scared. Instead, I flicked on the backyard light, and then the knocking stopped. I didn't even want to look out the window or door. I kept the light on, and then went back upstairs to my room, where I told Sarah about the creepy knocking, but I claimed that I chased whoever it was away. I exaggerated in fear of sounding like a coward. I also didn't want her to worry. We both imagined it to have been something to do with that house, though. Nothing has happened since, but I'll have to update throughout the winter. Update. It's been 2 weeks, and we haven't seen those people at the window ever since. But last night, we heard yelling and screaming from that house. I had to open our window, and it became clear there were muffled yells coming from that house. The fact that we heard it through 2 sets of closed windows just goes to show how loud the yelling was. Then, out of nowhere, it just stopped and went quiet. We almost called the police, but ultimately didn't. I'll update again if anything else happens, but we're really getting creeped out here now. This happened a few winters ago. I had just finalized my divorce about 6 months earlier, and to put it lightly, I needed a reset. Christina, my girlfriend at the time, suggested we take a trip somewhere quiet, something different from the chaos I'd been dealing with. We found a rental on a lake in upstate New York, and I booked it for a week without much thought. The place was exactly what I was looking for. A modern but cozy house positioned right on the lake, surrounded by woods, with only a handful of other properties scattered along the shoreline. Most of them were empty. It wasn't exactly peak season for lakefront living. I welcomed that, though. I really just wanted to be as far from civilization as possible. The host wasn't going to be there, but he gave us some detailed instructions on where to find the keys, some stuff about the house, you know, all the standard Airbnb stuff. We arrived in the morning, and when we got there was a small package sitting on the front steps waiting for us. There was no return address, just a little handwritten note that said, "Enjoy your stay, make sure to stay warm." That part was kind of cute. But there was something else in the package, a tiny box of matches. We figured it was some kind of welcome gift, a weird one, but harmless enough. Christina laughed and made a joke about how the upstate people have always been a little odd, and that was that. The next 2 days were exactly what we wanted. Long hikes through the snow, hot drinks by the fireplace, total peace and quiet. Oh yeah, I should probably mention that the snow had been steadily falling since we arrived. Not quite a blizzard because there wasn't that much wind or fog, but there was enough snow to make the landscape feel untouched. It was perfect. I think it's a good time to describe the layout of the house, at least somewhat. The master bedroom where we slept was on the 2nd floor. It had these massive windows across from the bed that overlooked the lake. The roof, or at least the windows, must have been pretty thin because we could hear the patter of snowflakes from inside, which was a really nice touch. There was also a skylight in there, so we could fall asleep to the beautiful sky and snow. Sometime after midnight on the 3rd night, I woke up to a sound. It was barely audible over the sound of the wind and the snow. The first thing I noticed was actually the storm. The snowfall had gotten considerably heavier since I had fallen asleep, and the outdoors was starting to resemble more of a blizzard. I shifted my focus back to the sound and realized why it stuck out. It sounded man-made, almost mechanical, unlike the natural sounds you'd expect to hear out in the wilderness. I quietly got out of bed, careful not to wake up Christina, and I made my way across the room. I looked out the window and saw the last thing I expected to see: a snowmobile. It was moving slowly across the ice. I know it's not the most abnormal thing. People drive snowmobiles on frozen lakes all the time, but I was just so confused given how late it was. Like I said, the snow was falling more heavily now, so visibility wasn't great, but I could still make out the shape. The driver was moving cautiously, like they weren't completely sure about the ice, and then they just stopped entirely. I watched as the person climbed off and started waving their hands like they were in distress. It looked like they were shouting, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. To my horror, I realized that they were facing in the direction of our house. Did they know we were there? It was impossible. Either way, it looked like they needed help. So I woke Christina and told her what was happening. Then I got dressed, went downstairs, and stepped outside onto the deck. It was freezing, even with the layers I was wearing. As soon as I opened the door, I got hit with another surprise. The person on the ice was a woman. I could tell because she was shouting for help, saying, "Thank God someone's there," and repeating that she lost her little boy somewhere in the snowstorm. It sounded like she was crying, or borderline hysterical. It wasn't a question of whether or not I'd help. If there was a child out there in that weather all alone, they weren't gonna last long. I laced my boots and made my way toward the lake, telling Christina to stay inside. As I approached the woman, I started to make out more details of her appearance. She was bundled up in a thick fur coat, and her hair was pulled back into a tight braid. The ice was completely solid. There wasn't even a chance of falling through. So I started to relax, knowing that it would have been impossible for that little boy to have fallen through. As I got closer, she started saying that he had run away from home and that she was looking for him. That statement gave me some pause. I had expected her to say something like he had fallen off her snowmobile and she hadn't noticed, and then I started to think about how ridiculous even that story was. How the hell do you not notice your own kid falling off a snowmobile? The adrenaline must have been clouding my judgment, because I hadn't even thought about that until right then. I was just about to ask her for more details when she said something that literally made me freeze. She asked me if I still got those matches, and I could tell she was smiling. For a split second, I had no idea what she was talking about, and then it all clicked at once. The matches, that package from the first day, the note. She had left it, not our host. Before I could react, she reached into her coat and pulled out a gun. She demanded my wallet and phone, and I gave them to her. I had no other choice. The whole interaction happened within the span of not even 30 seconds. Without another word, she climbed back onto the snowmobile and disappeared into the whiteout. As she was speeding away, I turned towards the house and ran as fast as I could on the ice, shouting for Christina to call the police the whole time. She was already on the phone with them when I finally made it back to the house. I locked the doors and paced the room, still shaking. I kept looking outside, half expecting to see that snowmobile circling back. The cops showed up about an hour later. By that point, the fresh snowfall had already covered any tracks that woman had left behind. Christina was hysterical, but I was mostly angry. I had come here for peace. There was hope, though. I couldn't think of a reliable way that woman had gotten her snowmobile onto the lake, so I expected the police to at least find the vehicle abandoned somewhere. Unfortunately, I was wrong. The police searched the area and found an old boat ramp on the far side of the lake. Their best guess was that she had come from there. I was furious and insisted they keep looking, but they told me the same thing I already knew. There wasn't much they could do. Even if she left something behind, they'd never find it in all the snow. With Christina's help, I tried tracking my phone, but by that point, it was already offline. The one good thing about the whole ordeal was that the Airbnb host refunded the entire trip. He sounded genuine on the phone and confirmed that he knew nothing about a welcome package, but something about the whole thing didn't sit right with me. How could that woman have possibly known we'd be staying there, and why go to such elaborate lengths just for a simple robbery? I couldn't help but think the host had something to do with it, but I had no proof. I brought it up with Airbnb, but they were about as helpful as you'd expect. I know I've always been a paranoid guy, but for the longest time after that, I couldn't help but feel that my ex-wife had something to do with it. It honestly makes me angry writing about this. I can just imagine her stupid face laughing at my expense. I've since come to terms with how unlikely that possibility is, but the whole thing still doesn't make any sense. Even now, I have no idea why someone would do all of that just for a wallet and phone, unless they were seriously messed up in the head and got some kind of sick pleasure out of it. My family owns a Northern California lake house that we visit for a couple of short weeks out of the year during primetime summer weather. It's 2 stories tall with an attic. When my younger sister and I were little, we used to climb into the attic and pretend we were camping with sleeping bags. We would even bring our puppy up there. There was one small window in the attic that we would peer through to look down at the lake. We always got a kick from watching people. In our early teenage years, we got a bit too big for both of us to stay in the attic comfortably, so that put an end to our sleeping bag antics. Looking back, it was a little sad, but everyone's got to grow up eventually. When our grandparents died, my parents inherited the remainder of their furniture. We had some space to fit the bigger furniture pieces, but the attic ended up getting stuffed with the smaller hand-me-down items. My parents didn't really have the heart to get rid of any of it, as it was all they had left of my Nana and Pop. It felt bittersweet putting all of my grandparents' stuff up there, but it felt reassuring knowing that little pieces of their most cherished items were still watching over us in a way. That whole period honestly felt like the ending of my childhood, and I bet my sister would agree. As we got older, it got harder for my family to make it out there to the lake house due to my studies and my parents' work. At best, we could all maybe get a singular week off for a family trip, but nothing beyond that. My parents didn't really want to rent it out during the many months we weren't there because they were scared of getting their antiques ripped off or broken by sketchy tenants. So for most of the year, it was more or less abandoned, only really being kept up by the landscapers my parents had to deal with. But a few years back, they met a local elderly veteran now working as an antique craft restorationist, and eventually signed a year-long lease with him, trusting him not to rough up the place. He was a small, disfigured man with white hair and one of those gruff, greasy beards. We all thought he looked a bit bizarre, with a gravelly, off-putting voice to match. But my dad bonded with the guy over his military background. My dad told us reassuringly that none of us understood what it was like to lay your life down for your country, and that guys like him were deserving of a good deal on a place to stay. We didn't really have a say in what my dad decided to do, but I can tell firsthand that this elderly man seriously creeps me out. Besides just that, we were all a bit sour about my dad signing the lease with the guy because it also meant that we wouldn't be able to visit the lake house in the summer. Anyways, my parents could use the extra cash while putting us through college, so my sister and I got over it. Even though our parents trusted him to keep the place from burning down, they would periodically check in on him through a little prodding from the landscaper workers. Plus, my parents had to make sure he hadn't fallen or had any issues that had gone unnoticed. These indirect check-ins seemed like the perfect solution. We stayed out of his nose, but still got peace of mind. You might call that a little invasive, but this guy was getting a great deal on the place anyway. I guess an elderly, crusty guy in his twilight years couldn't really care less about occasional questions from laid-back landscapers now and then. It wasn't like he was going to be able to physically keep the lake house in shape by himself anyway. My dad reasoned that his rent at least covered the maintenance. Despite it looking like he'd been a decent tenant, that all went out the window when the maintenance guys pointed out his predatory behavior to my mom over the phone. They told my mom that while doing landscaping for the neighbors' yards, they'd often spot him sitting weirdly on the porch, staring at the children by the lake. They said they had caught him doing other things too that I don't really feel comfortable repeating. My mom was a real saint, and absolutely loathed the idea of a disfigured old man eyeing children while being a tenant in her beloved lake house. For months, she talked my dad's ear off about it until he couldn't take it any longer. I still remember my mom screaming at him about how irresponsible it was for us to be accommodating a potential predator. My dad finally cracked. When the end of the year-long lease was up, my dad tried to let him down easy. He had high respect for him as a veteran.
My dad lied and told him that they planned on having some work done to the house that would leave him without electricity or plumbing for a few months. The guy left without too much of a fuss. It wasn't like the money my parents had made off of him was great. They assumed he'd be able to find another spot just fine. My mom told my dad to stop worrying about him so much. My mom wanted him out of there as quickly as possible, so we even paid the landscaping guys a little extra to help him grab his belongings. Admittedly, I was also kind of happy to see him gone. It had always felt weird that someone so strange had basically unlimited access to our house. Anyway, about a year after that, my younger sister graduated college, so my parents seized upon the opportunity, clocked in their sick days, and flew us out for a summer trip at the lake house. My parents had recently gotten a black lab mix named Bear, who my sister hadn't met yet, so she was especially thrilled. I'll skip all the irrelevant stuff, but by the time we actually made it to the house, the sun had just started setting, so we decided to leave Bear inside while we grabbed dinner in town. The house wasn't stocked with groceries or anything, so we didn't really have another option. Before we left, I noticed Bear was acting strange. His ears were perked up and he kept pacing, like he was waiting for something. I figured he was just restless from the long trip and brushed it off. We weren't gone long, just enough time to eat and let the heat die down. But when we stepped back inside, something felt off, like seriously off. Before I could say anything, I saw Bear. He was sprawled out at the foot of the stairs, panting hard. My sister screamed, and I realized there was blood smearing the floor beneath him. My mom immediately pulled out her phone, presumably to call 911. Without a word, my dad made his way into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. I followed suit, and the two of us slowly made our way around the house, searching for the intruder. By the time we made it to the top floor, my dad motioned for me to stop. It took me a second, but I ultimately realized what he was looking at. The attic hatch was open. It wasn't wide open, just cracked, but enough that we could see the faint glare of a flashlight shining down. I'm not proud to admit it, but I was petrified in fear in that moment. If it weren't for my dad, I don't know what would have happened. Without hesitation, he yanked the hatch and started bounding up the ladder. I didn't follow this time, I was too scared. I listened, expecting to hear some kind of fight, but no such sound came. Instead, a few moments later, my dad climbed back down the ladder, seemingly calm. He whispered to me that it was our old tenant, and I could tell that he was really torn about what to do. My mom eventually came running up the stairs, and when she found out what was going on, she started screaming at the top of her lungs. My dad wanted to let the guy go, but my mom wasn't having it. She had called the police already anyway, so that was that. When the police arrived, they went up to the attic and carried the guy down the ladder. He looked like he was in really bad shape, and I could tell my dad had nothing but sympathy. The police found our house key on his person, which also angered my mom because my dad had told her that he had changed the locks. Luckily, Bear survived, although he was seriously injured. As awful a thing as that man had done, my dad refused to press charges no matter what my mom or sister said to convince him. That was actually one of the biggest fights my parents ever had, and I never understood why my dad had so much sympathy for someone who had literally stabbed his dog. This all took place about a year ago, and we haven't been back to the lake house since. I really hate to say it, but this experience seriously tainted my childhood image of that house. I can't say I want to go back anytime soon. This happened last summer. I was 20 years old. My name is Kevin. My friend James comes from a very wealthy family. His dad is like an IP lawyer who contracts with the US government or something. They've got a bunch of properties all over the country and a handful of international ones too. That's the kind of wealth I'm talking about. One of their houses is on a relatively large but overall pretty secluded lake. The lake itself isn't so big that you can't see the houses on the other side of it, but it would be a workout and a half swimming across the whole thing. James' parents were never around, so he pretty much had unlimited access to that house, and he often invited friends over, with permission of course. There's something about being out on the lake that makes you feel invincible. It's a different feeling than the beach for sure. I'm not really sure how to explain it, but there's more of an exclusive vibe to it. Hopefully I can be successful enough to afford one day. Like I said, The lake itself is pretty secluded. Big fancy houses line the perimeter, but most of them would usually sit dark and empty. A lot of them were vacation homes for people who barely even used them. It's honestly kind of a shame thinking about it. There are upsides to that though. James would throw the craziest parties there because there were usually no neighbors to call the police. This night was different though. It was just the two of us, having a more chill night. I won't get into it, but I had just broken up with my girlfriend of 3 years and I was in dire need of some bro time. We were having a few beers out on the dock when I noticed a light flicking across the lake. I can't remember exactly what time it was. At first, I thought it was just the sun perfectly reflecting off something into my eye. But even when I moved my head to the side, I could still see it. It was flashing like someone was turning a light on and off repeatedly. I told James, and the two of us became fixed on it, trying to figure out what it could be. At some point, we realized the flashing wasn't random. It was following a pattern. 3 short bursts, followed by 3 longer ones, followed by 3 short ones. I guess I'm dumb for not knowing this, but James snapped his fingers and said it was Morse code. I looked at him like he was crazy and asked him when in the world he had learned Morse code. He told me he didn't actually know it, but he knew what 3 short, 3 long, 3 short meant. SOS. I called BS and pulled out my phone, but to my surprise, he was actually right. Like I said, maybe I'm dumb for not knowing that, but I'm not really one for obscure knowledge anyway. The flashing continued for another minute or so, following that same pattern, before stopping abruptly. The two of us had just been staring at it the whole time. I really didn't know what to think. It could have been a joke, but there was always that chance that someone was actually in trouble. James immediately suggested calling the cops, but I reminded him that we'd been drinking and we weren't legal yet. I was honestly fighting a DUI charge at the time, so the last thing I needed was another run-in with the police. He wasn't thrilled about that answer, and I could tell he was torn about the situation. The two of us couldn't really think of a rational explanation besides a kidnapping or something along those lines. We thought it might have been someone who had fallen and needed help, but that didn't make any sense because they probably would have just called the police. We've always been those adventurous, delinquent type guys, so we decided it was worth checking out ourselves. If it turned out to be serious, we'd call the police then. We went back inside. James' brother had a bunch of switchblades lying around his room. He was kind of a weird kid. So we grabbed a few of them just for peace of mind. James said he was good to drive and that we should drive around the lake to that house, but I told him I really wasn't comfortable with that for obvious reasons. He joked about my situation and I laughed it off. If we weren't driving, there was only really one other option. The two of us walked back out to the yard and dragged James' dad's kayak into the water. We were laughing at first, enjoying the adventure of it all, but the further out we got onto the lake, the quieter we got. I think both of us realized how dumb of an idea it was, but neither of us wanted to be the one to spoil the fun. The sun had almost fully set at that point, and it was getting harder to see. It wasn't pitch black or anything. We had light from some of the lake houses to guide us, but it was still a bit unsettling. As we got closer, the house came into view. It was big like the others, but it was obviously not maintained very well. For starters, the dock was half collapsed, literally. Half of it was just sunken into the water. The flashing had also stopped, which was kind of a bad sign too. We had planned on just tying the kayak to the dock, but we obviously couldn't do that anymore given how unstable it looked. Luckily, the yard wasn't too high up above the water, so we beached the kayak on the yard instead, careful not to slip on the rocks. I felt the adrenaline rush start coming on. I could tell James was feeling the same thing. We looked up toward the house. The light had been coming from the second floor, that much we knew. James was freaking out at that point and insisted that we just leave and call the police. I told him we'd have to kayak all the way back to his house to even do that, as there was no service on the lake and that we need to connect to Wi-Fi. I reminded him that we had explored 1,000,000 abandoned buildings before, and this wasn't too different. He wasn't thrilled with that logic, but agreed anyway. Believe me, I know how dumb this was. Everyone I talk to about this shares that same opinion, but I've never been one to make good decisions, and neither is James. We didn't walk to the front door. That would have been suicide. Instead, we crept around the house until we found a window that was unlocked. The two of us silently slipped inside. The house was empty. Not just abandoned, but empty, like stripped. There was no furniture and no junk in there either. To be frank, there was no signs that anyone had ever even lived there. The floors and walls were completely bare. We moved cautiously through the rooms, looking for the stairs. There was no one in sight, and all the rooms were just as empty as the first one had been. We finally found the stairs and slowly made our way up. I had made a mental note of where the window was, and we slowly walked down one of the hallways until we got to what I guessed was the room the light had been coming from. I pressed my ear against the door and heard nothing. I glanced over at James. He nodded, and I carefully pushed the door open. The room was empty, with the exception of one thing by the window. I tiptoed over to it and realized what it was. It was one of those old projectors, and it was facing the window. Alarm bells immediately started going off in my head. This was a trap. Someone had set this up deliberately. James must have realized the same thing, because I just heard him start sprinting back the way we had came, not even trying to be quiet. I turned without another thought and followed him. As we were running down the stairs, I heard a door, presumably a closet door, swing open from the room I had just been in, followed by rapid thumping sounds. We bolted down the stairs and back through the house to that first window. James jumped through and I was next. As I was climbing through, I heard those footsteps from behind me again, bounding down the stairs. I didn't even look. I just made it through the window and ran to catch up with James, who was already down by the lake's edge. As I was running to catch up to him, I heard him curse, and I quickly realized why. The kayak was gone. I turned, and from the side of the house, there was a person running toward us. I could barely process what I was seeing. He was fast. I couldn't get a good look at him, but he was big, definitely an adult. I pulled out my switchblade, ready to defend myself. I expected James to do the same, but instead, he turned and jumped straight into the lake, sneakers, hoodie, everything. I didn't even think, I just followed. The water was freezing, but I didn't care. I swam as fast as I could, trying to fight the burning sensation in my arms and legs. We swam toward the light from James' house, which looked like it was miles away. The swim felt endless, but on pure adrenaline, we made it. By the time we dragged ourselves onto James' dock, I thought I had hypothermia. I don't think I've ever been that cold in my life. We ran straight inside, locked every door, and called the police. It took them almost an hour to show up. It was honestly kind of outrageous. When they finally did, they went straight across the lake to investigate. They were over there for a while, but when they came back, they told us exactly what I expected to hear, that there was no one. They confirmed this house had been abandoned for years. No signs of recent occupancy, no footprints, no gear, no personal belongings, nothing. Just an empty house. They weren't happy with us. They gave us the whole "why didn't you call first" speech. James's parents were even more pissed when they found out. Let's just say I wasn't invited back to the lake house after that. James told me his parents were threatening to sue the town for allowing something like that to happen, and the police for refusing to investigate further. As for me, I still don't know what happened that night. I don't know who was in that house, or why they set that trap, or what they planned to do if we hadn't run. I don't think I want to. Most of my friends agree that it was a trap, and think that whoever was planning the whole thing got cold feet until the last minute. I really don't want to think about what would have happened if they had gone through with whatever they were planning on doing. During a road trip, I was passing through Ohio. It was around that time I was starting to get sleepy behind the wheel, so I stopped in this small town called Xenia. I looked for a hotel or motel and found this place called Xenia Country Inn. It looked a little run down, but so did this whole town if I'm being honest. Plus, all I needed was a night's sleep. Nothing fancy, so I parked in the lot and went to the little front office, which was in the front corner of one of the two buildings to the motel. There was an old man sitting there reading the paper. It was hot in there, and there was a loud buzzing sound from his tabletop fan. I asked for a room, and the man finally looked up from his paper without greeting me, and said $65. I assumed he meant $65 for the room, so I handed him my credit card. I asked if it's possible to get a corner room, and he simply said no. The customer service here was clearly not something included in the price. The man handed me this old-fashioned key on an otherwise blank key ring. They still didn't use key cards at this place. I walked across the parking lot to my room. The door was actually hard to unlock. I had to shimmy the key a little just to get it to finally turn. Before walking in, I looked around the lot, and there were only 2 other cars in the parking lot. It was a ghost town. I stepped into the room, and it smelled like a mix of cotton and vomit. I wondered if I should go back and ask for a different room, but I realized by the look of this place, all the rooms probably smelt. The room was small, and had a blue, dirty, worn-out looking carpet, a couch, a small coffee table, and a bed. I shut the door and tried to lock it, but I was having trouble. More trouble than I did unlocking it. After about 30 seconds of shimmying and almost popping a blood vessel trying to unlock it, I felt I may have broken it. But when I tried opening the door, it wouldn't open. So even though the door wasn't fully locked, as long as the door wouldn't open, that's all that mattered, I figured. I crawled up in the bed, and I heard all the old springs squeaking as my weight pushed into the mattress and the bed frame. I tried putting on the TV, but of course the remote didn't work. So I just crawled under the covers and tried to go to sleep. Then it happened. I nearly jumped out of my own skin when there was one loud thump at the window. I looked at the guy standing outside of it, and he started talking, sounding all hurt and in need of help. He was saying, "Hey, please let me in, I hurt myself bad, I need help." And he definitely saw me in that bed. I yelled back to go to the front desk. He wouldn't stop though. There was no way I was opening that door. I had a feeling he was acting and this was a trap. Eventually, after ignoring him for long enough, he left. I turned to check and confirm, and he was gone. I hadn't realized how truly unsafe this area was. I had to get up and check the lock on the door just to be safe and make sure the door wouldn't open. I gave the door a couple good pulls, and it didn't open. I then closed the curtains in front of the 2 windows so that he couldn't come back and look in at me again. That shook me up a bit, but the nerves calmed within half an hour, and I was able to fall into a half sleep not too long after. I started having this weird dream where I was in a closed supermarket running from the manager who was chasing me, and at some point during the dream, these clicking sounds started taking over, to the point that my whole dream shifted to incorporate these sounds, and then with that, I was awake. The room was cold for some reason. Then I looked down and realized the blanket was pulled off of me. I sat up to pull it back over me, but then I saw at the foot of the bed, there was this tall figure looming over me. Before I could scream, he went shh and told me not to move. He told me he wouldn't hurt me if I didn't make any movements or sounds. Then he asked me where my wallet was. I told him in my jeans pocket on the floor. All I saw was this figure towering over me in the bed, moving away from the foot of the bed to my jeans on the floor. I heard him rustling with the jeans, digging through the pocket until he found it. Then he asked what else I had in there. I was just taking a road trip. With that, he didn't say another word and left. I ran to try and relock the door as soon as he left, having the same trouble as earlier. I then called the police, but they were of no immediate assistance. We went to the guy at the front desk, who played back the video footage caught. However, the guy who entered the room was wearing a face mask and a hat, hiding all of his features. I got my money back and left. Thank God I didn't have much cash in my wallet. I canceled all my cards and slept in my car. I learned my lesson, never to stop at a sketchy motel. Early last year, my father and I traveled down to do some charity work in a small town that was flooded from recent rainfall. We had gathered a truckload full of donated clothes and items to help families get back on their feet. The first night, we stayed in a hotel that had a perfect view of the ocean. That night, my dad and I stayed up watching the Blair Witch Project on my laptop using the hotel's free Wi-Fi. Let's just say I didn't get much sleep. The next night, my mom had booked us a room at a motel, seeing as we didn't expect to stay a second night. It was 100 meters away from a trailer park, and the property overlooked a large lake. The area was tucked away from the public and was surrounded by trees. My mom claimed that everywhere else was fully booked, so we had no other options. We met the 2 managers who ran and lived at the motel. There was an old lady who was sweet and informed us about everything we needed to know, including the fact that the lake hadn't been full for 20 years. Her husband, however, looked like he was taken straight from a serial killer movie, him being the serial killer. He never spoke a word to us, he never smiled. His wrinkles melted on his face, and he had dark rings around his eyes. That's when my dad and I started to have an uneasy feeling about that place. The rest of the day went by in a blur, so my dad and I went out for pizza and a movie afterward to avoid going back to that place as much as possible. Once we arrived back at the motel, it was around 8 p.m. and it was completely dark. As we went to the back of the truck to get our luggage, we found a bag of children's clothes hidden underneath a spare tire. We began to walk the bag over to the trailer park, thinking that a family may get good use out of it, when I felt the sudden urge to go back to the motel, seeing as we watched a scary movie last night coincidentally about teenagers encountering a witch in the woods. We went to the front desk with the bag and asked the creepy old manager if we could leave it with him to donate to the trailer park, seeing as they were neighbors and we had to leave early in the morning to go back home. His eyes widened and he shook his head while saying, "No, there's no way in hell, I refuse to go there." Then he walked off. Dad and I just looked at each other, saying with our eyes, "What the hell just happened?" We then decided to drop it off in the charity bin back home. We went to sleep once we had all our showers, which was about an hour or so later. I specifically remember waking up at 2:17 a.m. because of Dad's snoring. I stayed up reading a book on my phone, my body faced towards the door. I also remember hearing cars speeding up and down the driveway that night. I let the thought slide, thinking it was just some guys goofing off. That assumption later vanished after I noticed a bright blue light appear through the cracks on the top and bottom part of the door, and silent whispers coming from the other side that I was unable to decipher. I was too scared to even move. I was frozen in the spot. My heart was beating in my throat and my hands were shaking, and I mean literally shaking. I heard the door handle begin to rattle, and that's when I knew that this wasn't going to end well. The light then disappeared, followed by complete and utter silence. I was still frozen in that spot for another 3 minutes, which felt like hours, before I woke up to my dad and told him everything that had happened. He then laughed and explained to me that earlier in the night he couldn't sleep due to hearing scratches in the walls right beside our bed. I was confused and didn't believe him until he put his finger to his lips while saying, "Shh, do you hear that?" Everything went silent until I heard brief scratches coming from our bed frame. I shot out of the bed and told Dad that we needed to leave, so we left the room key on the bed while sneaking off to the truck. We ended up leaving at 2:32 a.m. Never will I ever go near that motel ever again. Long story short, my ex-girlfriend and I had a pretty explosive relationship and we didn't get along very often. We were on this weekend trip in the mountains just to go sightseeing and hiking because we thought it would be good for us. But shit hit the fan in the hotel room on the second night, and basically I couldn't sleep in the same room as her. Instead of getting another hotel room for myself for like $150, I drove literally down the road to a motel and stopped there to stay for a fraction of the price. My logic was, if I left for the night and gave her time to cool off, maybe things would be better by morning. I got a room for, I'm not lying, $50 for the night. When I was walking towards my room, the room next door was wide open. As I passed, I looked inside, and it was lit up by the blue glow of the TV screen. Though from the angle I was at, I could not see what was on the screen. I didn't see anyone inside, but then again, I didn't stop to look like a weirdo. I proceeded to my room. It was a modest, normal-looking motel room for the price. Just a queen-size bed with a typical tacky floral bed cover, a TV, and a sofa. I wasn't really tired, so I just laid with the TV on and played games on my phone for a while. There was some weird noise from what I thought was coming from the TV, so I turned it off, but the noise persisted. It wasn't the TV. So I got up and listened, and realized it was coming from the room next door. I couldn't tell if it was a fighting couple, if it was the TV from next door, or if it was the sound of someone dying. It was just incredibly muffled. At this point, I had nothing else to do but to try and go to sleep. But then there was a banging on the wall separating the two rooms. I got up and went closer to the wall, and it happened again. It was without a doubt someone on the other side pounding on it with their fist. Why were they doing this? I can't say I wasn't a little freaked out, but I had to just be a man and confront them. I went over next door. Surprisingly, the door to the room was still open and the TV was still on, but there was no sound. I knocked on the open door, asking if there was a problem or if someone needed help. There was no response. I could even see that the bathroom door was open and the light was off. I stepped into the room slowly, cautiously. When I cleared the wall blocking the view of the sofa and the bed and still saw nobody, I just stood there all confused like. I went closer to the TV to look at what exactly was on the screen. It was just a blank blue screen. But there was a sticky note on the screen. It had writing on it. I picked it off the screen. It said, "Check under the bed." I dropped the note and ran out of the room, slamming the door. I ran back to my room and made sure to double lock the door with the chain lock. I crawled into bed and texted my girlfriend telling her what just happened and that I was freaking out. She called me immediately and I started telling her over the phone. As I was mid-explaining it, there were more bangs on the motel room wall. She heard it clearly because I put it on speaker. I started freaking out, and she told me to run to my car or to the front desk. I chose to run to the front desk so I could get my money back. I told the guy at the front desk that he should go to the room next to mine and kick the person out, but he looked at me and laughed and said that there was no one staying on either side of that room. He seemed to know immediately that they were both vacant. I told him he needs to check it out and that I needed my money back. So he went with me with the key to the room in his hand and unlocked the door. But now the TV was off and the room was dark. He walked inside and checked under the bed as the note had said. Even the post-it note that I dropped on the floor was gone. He refused to refund me, but it was $50. I didn't care. I left and went back to the hotel to my girlfriend and was glad to hug her and sleep in the same bed as her. I don't know what I witnessed in that motel room. I don't know who or what was under that bed, and I don't want to know. I bought a vacation mobile home almost 2 months ago. It's a complete shack, 2 small bedrooms, a little living room, kitchen, and 1 bathroom. It's simply meant as a nice, peaceful place to come to escape the city, either by myself or with my girlfriend, if I ever get one. The property has 2 acres, so it's nice and roomy too. And one of the main appeals is that it's only a 10-minute drive from a mountain that I like to go snowboarding at a few times a year. My first time there, I was decorating the place with my family. We all went to one of the local furniture outlets in the area and picked out a few couches. We actually banged this all out in one weekend, and thank God for my dad's pickup truck, which made transporting all this stuff easy. During all this back and forth from store to mobile home, I guess the closest neighbor noticed all the commotion, and he came over to greet us. He introduced himself as Dale. He was, I guess, what you'd expect from a local here. He had a thick Hudson Valley accent, and his dialect and mannerisms were obviously different than, I guess, us city folk are used to. Nevertheless, he seemed nice at first. We all introduced ourselves, though I knew I'd really be the one needing to get to know him since this was my property. After chatting with him for a while, we tried to resume unloading and bringing furniture into the home. He lingered for a while just watching us. My dad tried to converse more with him here and there. Eventually, though, Dale said goodbye and walked back up the road to his home. We left Sunday together, and the next time I went up there was 2 weeks later. I went alone this time just to bring more stuff up, like my snowboarding gear, and set up the Wi-Fi. I guess Dale saw my car pass by, because soon after I got there, he knocked on the open door and stepped inside and said hello. I gave him a smile and told him to come in, which he already was. He told me the place was looking nice already. Then after some small talk, he invited me over for a beer. I said why not, and followed him up the road to his home, which is also a mobile home, maybe a little bigger than mine. We then sat outside on his deck. He grabbed me a Heineken from inside and sat across from me at the table. So I tried to get to know him. I started by asking how long he's been there. He answered with 20 years too long. I asked a few more questions and he had some similar, pessimistic yet somewhat joking responses. This kind of set the tone for the rest of the conversation. So he started asking me questions, like what brought me here, where exactly I was from, etc. All the questions he didn't ask us 2 weeks earlier. I told him I'm from Queens, and that I wanted a place to escape and to snowboard. I guess he didn't like my answer, I don't think. He started ranting about how us city folk are coming in and ruining shit, polluting the place and littering everywhere. This turned into somewhat of a debate, where I was trying to defend myself and other so-called city folk. I considered it a little debate, until I saw how heated he was getting, and he started to actually raise his voice in his thick accent, with his half-drank beer in his hand. This spiraled so out of control that at one point he said word for word, "I don't know why y'all can't just stay where the fuck you belong." I stood up and with a smile on my face said, "Okay, I think I'm gonna head back now. Thank you for the beer." He didn't say anything. He just looked down at his beer as I walked away. As I was like 100 feet away from his home, he yelled out, "I'm sorry." I looked back at him and gave him a thumbs up. At the same time, I was horrified that that's gonna be my neighbor here. 20 years alone must have him losing his mind, and maybe he doesn't know how to deal with people anymore. That was the excuse I chalked up for him. But that night, while I was laying on the mattress I had on the floor, watching a movie on my laptop, I heard a voice from outside. It sounded like someone talking to themselves, cursing to themselves. I looked out the window, but I didn't see anyone out there. It was just simply too dark out. The property is big and it's mostly woods, so you could imagine how freaked out I was hearing a voice out there. The next day, Dale knocked on my door again around midday. I knew it was him because I heard him calling my name. I didn't want to deal with him again. I stayed in my room. He had to have kept knocking for 5 minutes, which in itself was weird. And at one point he said, "I know you're in there, your car is here." That freaked me out. The guy is clearly not normal by my standards, and he was already giving an early, weird, obsessive vibe. He finally left. Or did he? I continued on the rest of my day, almost uncomfortable to go outside in fear he was out there nearby watching to see if I was actually home and ignoring him. After dinner, I started watching another movie on the TV through my phone, and for the second night in a row, I heard a voice outside, even over the TV. I had to turn off the TV to look outside. Couldn't see anything, so I went out to the deck and flicked on the deck light. I saw Dale standing about 5 feet into the woods, arms flat at his sides for a second, before he could react to the light, and then he ran into the woods. I went back inside and considered calling 911. I called my dad, and long story short, he said hold off on doing that because once I call 911 on the neighbor here, is the day I don't want to show my face here anymore. I tried to just sleep through the night. Tomorrow I'd leave and go home for a month. Within an hour of me laying on the mattress, I heard Dale outside screaming in an angry voice, "City piece of shit, I know you're in there. Leave, no one wants you here." He sounded like he was in a drunken fit of rage, but this was officially the moment I realized my neighbor there is a complete psychopath, and he may be the reason why I got this home at such a good price. I went home the next day, taking my valuables back home with me. I haven't been back there since, but you better believe the next time I go there, it'll be with my whole family. If he keeps it up, cops will be called. At this moment, I'm not really sure what to do, but I'm considering trying to sell this place if this keeps up, because at the moment, I'm actually scared to go up there alone. My family and I used to live in a rough neighborhood when I was 7. Even the neighbor on one side was a total creep and wasn't friendly at all. I don't personally remember much of the story because I was way too young, but my mom remembers it all too well. It was a regular night like any other, which makes this that much scarier. It was just my mom, my 2 siblings, and I at home. My dad was gone on a business trip as he would be often. That night, around midnight, someone started knocking on our door. My mom woke up and went to the front door and asked who it was. No one answered. She thought that maybe it was some kids playing ding-dong ditch, so she went back to bed. About 30 minutes later, again, someone starts knocking. She gets up and peers through the side window to see if she can spot anyone out there, but nobody is there. In any other neighborhood, this would just be assumed to be annoying kids doing some night ding-dong ditching, but in this area, you could never assume anything but the worst. My mom started to worry, so she went back to her room and grabbed my dad's shotgun, and then she sat in the living room in the dark, waiting. During all of this, she never woke any of us up, as we were all little kids at the time and she didn't want to panic us. Again, while she was in the living room now, there was more knocking. She gets up to peer through the window again, expecting to see someone new, but still no one. My mom begins shouting at whoever it is that she's going to call the cops, and that if anyone tries to come in, she would shoot them. This threat, a legitimate threat mind you, apparently worked because that was the last of the knocking. At some time between then and the police showing up, my mom woke us just to be safe in the case that something bad happened. At about 2 in the morning, the police finally show up and do a quick search outside of our house while we waited inside. After their search, they come in and tell my mom that they had found a piece of barbed wire about 4 feet long next to the front door and asked if it belonged to my mom. She said it wasn't hers and asked why. The cop told her it belonged to whoever was knocking on the door, and that they were likely planning on strangling my mom with the barbed wire when she opened the door to see who was knocking. They said that she was very smart to not open the door to see who was there, otherwise it could have cost her her life. The cops said they'd patrol the neighborhood until morning and do a thorough investigation once there was daylight. That morning, as they were searching around the house, they found footprints leading around to the back of the house leading to my bedroom window. They had also found nicks in the window sill where the person was trying to pry open the window to break in but failed. My mom always suspected it was this one neighbor because on several occasions, she would catch him staring into our house at her through his curtains, and he was incredibly creepy and unfriendly all around. He also would be the first one to know when my dad wasn't home, since he knew what vehicle he drives. Not long after that, we moved out of that neighborhood, thank God. We had a new neighbor move in recently, which at first I was completely okay with because we never really got along with our old neighbors. But boy do I miss them now. So it was a few months back that we saw a new van in the driveway next door. No moving trucks or nothing though. We didn't see anyone moving in furniture or anything at all. It was kind of weird. To be friendly, my wife and I decided to go knock on the door to introduce ourselves, but no one opened the door, which was also weird because their car was in the driveway. We figured it wasn't a big deal. For all we knew, they were in the shower or sleeping or something. So our bedroom is upstairs, and at one of our windows we can see into the neighbor's backyard. The house next door has a detached garage in the backyard. The new neighbor's van wasn't in the driveway all day. Then, all of a sudden, when my wife and I were reading in bed, we heard the garage next door open up. Naturally, we were curious to look out the window and see if we could catch a peek at what the man looks like. We creased the blinds a bit to look out there, and there he was, this middle-aged looking guy in a white t-shirt and jeans. The motion light over his garage was on, so that's how we saw him. He was bringing boxes from his van into his garage. We stopped spying before it got weird. A few days passed and his car wasn't in the driveway at all, until one night we heard his garage door open again. Every so often on this one night we would hear some weird scraping sounds coming from out in his garage, and then occasional bangs and such, probably from him dropping boxes in the garage. But what really did make sense was that metallic scraping sound that wouldn't stop. I went over to the window to look out again. This time he caught me staring. He looked up at my window and I felt incredibly awkward. I walked away from the window, and seconds later, I heard him close the garage door. I told my wife I'm going to go out there and say hi. That's the only way I figured I could redeem the awkwardness I just created. I went outside in my shorts and t-shirt and went over next door to the driveway, but the man was in his van with the engine running already, and I think when he saw me, he backed out of the driveway really fast. Then he disappeared down the street into the night. The whole thing was incredibly weird, and I was getting the vibe he was avoiding us now. I was a bit curious now what exactly was going on with all the scraping sounds by his garage. I walked into his backyard to the garage door, and something was making noise in there. I kept hearing thumping sounds. He had to have an animal in there or something. Then I heard my wife's voice call my name from our window, and she asked what the hell I was doing. I looked at her and put my finger to my lip. I tried to open his garage, but it was locked. That was enough snooping. I walked back to our house and back to bed. Later that night, I woke up to my wife shaking me, whispering that she heard our backyard gate open. I told her to stop messing with me because she was freaking me out, but she said she swears she heard it. I had to be the man of the house and go out there and look. First, I took a look out the window. The lights in the neighbor's yard were off, and our yard was too dark to see anything. I went downstairs and took a look out the front door. The neighbor's van was in the driveway. He was home. I went to the backyard now and turned on the lights. As I did, I heard someone running away to the side of the house. Then the backyard gate slammed shut. I was horrified, but I made myself angry and chased after them. I ran to the gate and then to the front of the house, then to the street. I was the only one out there, yet I felt as though I was being watched from any possible direction. I went back inside the house, told my wife that someone was indeed in the yard but I didn't see them, and she asked me if I thought it was the neighbor. I told her I honestly don't know. But the next day, I went to the neighbor 2 doors down, Gene, and asked him if he had met the new guy yet. He said no, but that he'd keep being awoken to sounds late at night coming from his garage. I told him about how someone snuck into our yard the night before, and he found that equally freaky and weird. We agreed to text each other and go over together the next time we'd hear weird noises to finally meet this guy. So the next day was Saturday. As I was opening all the living room blinds in the morning, I saw that it was like the first or second time that the neighbor's car was in the driveway during the day. Then I looked at his house, at one of the windows. There he was, standing stiff as a statue, looking at me as if he were waiting for me to open the blinds. I expected him to look away, but we just locked eyes. Unbroken eye contact for a solid 20 seconds. I waved because I didn't know what else to do. When he didn't wave back or even crack half a smile, I started calling for my wife, and when I got her, I told her to look out the window, but by then he was no longer standing at the window. I said to hell with it at this point, and went next door again with my wife and knocked on the door and rang the bell. I felt knocking is a bit more assertive. I heard one loud slam from inside the house, but he never came to the door. This was the last straw. I went over to Gene's house again, and when he opened the door, he asked me if I saw his texts yet. I said no, and I also didn't have my phone on me, so he told me that last night he heard a muffled crying sound from outside, in the new guy's direction, and he texted me about it. Gene came out with me to knock on the neighbor's door one more time, and once again, no answer. We all by this point, including Gene's wife and my wife, knew something is seriously off here. The next day, the van was gone again, and it's been almost 2 weeks and the van hasn't returned. We don't know where he went. We don't know if or when he's coming back. These past few nights, either my wife or I wake up in the middle of the night thinking we hear noises outside, and when we go to the window to see if the van's in the driveway next door, it's not. It's crazy none of us even know the guy's name, and we're still trying to put the pieces together, because one night I heard something definitely alive in that garage making noises, and then another night, Gene heard what he thought to be a muffled crying. Obviously he'll most likely be back, but I don't think any of us are looking forward to it, and maybe for peace of mind, we should anonymously report him. So recently, I had an experience while I was at a friend's house alone watching his dog that inspired me to do another Home Alone themed video. I spent so much time reading stories of people's horrific experiences that I forget these things could happen to me too. In a bit of a different fashion, I'll tell that experience I had after the viewer submitted stories at the end of the video. A more positive experience I would also like to talk about is my experience with Scentbird, a fragrance subscription service that allows you to choose new designer fragrances to try out every month at an affordable price. You get to try the first fragrance from Scentbird for only $8, and your next month will be only $16.95. The vials are cheaper than a lot of the rollerballs or travel sizes you'll find elsewhere. Scentbird is a great solution for beginners in fragrance looking to experiment with certain scents. Scentbird allows you to try different designer fragrances from brands like Prada, Gucci, and Versace with a 30-day supply of any fragrance you choose. This way, if you're just getting into building your fragrance collection, you can test out what you like and what you don't without having to purchase a full bottle. Through Scentbird, I found my favorite scents: Eros Flame by Versace, which mixes Italian lemon, pink pepper, and vetiver for a classier scent, and Cross River Gorilla by Sanctuary for a more casual scent. So if you're looking to start your own collection, head on over to Scentbird by scanning my QR code using code 55nightmare to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird. Growing up, I was raised in rural Michigan. There was hardly anything to do. If you like staring at trees and crops and lots of alone time, that was the place to be. I got out of there as soon as I got a car and enough money to move. I'm not a nature hater or anything, but I'd pick being by a big city any day. My parents don't own that property anymore. They sold it 5 years ago, but to describe it, it was a 3-acre property. The house itself was pretty big, and there was a storage building out back. I was 13 when this happened. My parents would leave me alone often at this age. They trusted me because I matured at a young age and I had responsibilities on the property. It was a weekend, and I was playing Vice City on my PS2 in the living room, when suddenly, a loud metallic bang came from outside somewhere in the yard. I right away ran to every window I could to look outside to see if I could see something, and I didn't see anything until I got to the window looking out to the storage building out back. The door to it was completely open. I went immediately to grab the rifle from the closet and go outside. I made my presence known, shouting "Who's in there?" to no avail. When I got to the door, I made it known I had a gun before looking inside. There was a bunch of stuff in there, from the sit-down mower to the quad to infinite little lawn care items. Someone could have been hiding behind any of that stuff. Even as a kid, I didn't scare easily, but at that moment, I got really unsettled, and so I closed the door to the building and went back inside the house. I locked the door and then sat at the window for the longest time, watching the storage building, expecting the door to open at any second. That door was heavy and impossible to just open by itself. It was simply a fact that someone came and opened it. Whether they were still inside of the building, I wasn't sure. I decided to go call my dad and ask his opinion. I went to the kitchen to the landline phone and called my dad's cell phone. He didn't pick up, so I left a voicemail. This was back when you'd still have to leave someone a voicemail because texting wasn't mainstream. After that, I went back to sitting next to the window, but now I put on a TV show in the background to make this less monotonous. I took the phone with me. I was probably about to give up when I heard creaks from upstairs. My heart was now in my throat. I had to ask myself the big question: was I working myself up, or was someone here? I had a serious guard dog mentality. Even if I didn't love that place, I saw it as mine, my family's. I had to protect it. But I was in over my head. I grabbed the rifle again and walked upstairs. I didn't say anything. Calling out would only make a potential intruder know that I heard them. I made it to the top of the stairs, and I turned on the light for the upstairs hallway. There were 5 doors to open, all of them closed. 4 led to bedrooms, 1 led to the bathroom. Each door had a decently large crack underneath that would allow you to see under. The creak in the ceiling I heard moments earlier came from the side of the house my parents' bedroom was on, so I got down on my knees and looked under the crack of the door, and I saw 2 bare feet facing the other side of the door. I felt my stomach twist into a knot. The reality of the situation just became so much more real, and I realized I wasn't ready to threaten or, God forbid, shoot someone. I got up and quickly went downstairs, and I hid in the bathroom to call my dad. He still didn't pick up. I left another voicemail, and then I called again and again. He never picked up. He must have had his phone set down somewhere. I finally called 911, as I should have done right away, and I whispered into the phone the whole time, detailing exactly what was taking place. I was told to sit tight in the bathroom and not say a word. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and then they approached the bathroom door as if whoever it was somehow knew I went straight to the bathroom. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and there was a brief pause before a deep voice said, "What's up, kid?" I still remember the voice and those words so vividly. If I heard that voice today, I'd still recognize it immediately. I almost wanted to cry, that's how scared I was. I disobeyed what the operator told me, and I spoke. I said loud and clear, "I'm on the phone with the cops right now, and I have a gun." I put the operator on speaker as she was asking me if everything's okay. The man attempted to open the door, and when he realized it was locked, I heard him walk away. I heard the footsteps fade to silence, and then the sound of a door slamming. It was the sound of the back door. I'm sure I breathed a sigh of relief, and from there on, I waited for the police to arrive. When they did, I felt like 1,000,000 pounds just lifted off my shoulders. After a thorough inspection of the house inside and out, confirming that the man was gone, they asked if there was anywhere else I could stay that night, and I said yes, my uncle's house. We contacted my uncle, who came and spoke with the police. Then he took me back to his place. The thing that haunts me the most is that it was my fault. I could have prevented this. I left the door unlocked as I went to the storage building to investigate. Clearly, that's when the man simply walked right into the house. Even with a rifle in my hands, I didn't feel safe at all. It was truly the most horrific experience of my life. I was 18 when my parents went away on a week-long anniversary trip. My sister had already moved out by this point, so I had to hold the fort. My parents' property is enclosed by woods and a dirt driveway leading to the road. The road is a quiet back road with equally sized properties running alongside it, all of them separated a decent distance, so it's a really isolated feel up there. Everyone in town knows each other. You see familiar faces all the time for the most part. At the gas station, at the grocery store, at the bars, which I'd learn a few years later when I started going to them. Speaking of gas stations, this story starts one day while my parents were away. I was at a gas station filling up my tank when a black Jeep Cherokee pulled up to the pump next to mine. A man with a goatee stepped out, greeted me, and started filling his tank. In that town, it was normal for strangers to greet each other like that. He had his nozzle locked into the gas tank, and then he walked around to my side of the pump and went, "Excuse me, do you know how to get to the interstate from here?" I helped him to the best of my ability. He pulled out a notepad and started writing down the directions I gave him. Very odd how he wouldn't just do that on his cell phone like anyone else would. He thanked me and asked if I'm from the area. I said yeah, I grew up here, and he said he's from out of town. He didn't specify where. He then went back to his side and put the nozzle back in the pump. He then asked my name, as he said, "It's nice meeting you." I said my name's Kate. He said what a lovely name, and then got in his car as I got into mine. I drove out first and turned left to go up the road back home. It was only a few minutes worth of driving before I was approaching our turn into the driveway. I slowed down and put my blinker on, then turned right onto the property. It was at that moment that I noticed the car behind me was that same black Jeep Cherokee. He passed me as I turned into our driveway. He went the complete opposite way that I told him to go to get to the interstate. As he passed me, he didn't slow down or anything, so it seemed that maybe he just forgot the directions I gave him and went the wrong way. I let myself inside and went about the rest of my day doing whatever. I think it was that night that I was going out to meet up with my friends that I stepped outside and walked to my car and heard the sound of footsteps nearby. Like I said, the house is enclosed by woods, and this was in the middle of the summertime. It could have been any number of animals, so I didn't investigate. I just got in my car and left. But when I got back home hours later and walked from my car to the house, a man's voice from out somewhere in the woods called out Kate. I got the chills as I looked around, and then in a panic rushed to open the front door. I slammed it shut and sat on the couch to breathe. The neighbors all knew my name, but the houses are not on top of each other, so it's a bit of a walk. And there was no reason for one of them to call my name like that, like a creep, and not identify themselves. I decided to call my parents to tell them, and their explanation was it must have been one of the neighbors, and they'll probably knock on the door. I didn't tell them about the encounter at the gas station. The next day, which was a Saturday, I stayed home most of the day, and later that night, I once again was going out to meet with my friends. After getting ready and everything, I went outside, and as I was walking to my car, I heard loud and clear from the not-so-far distance someone call Kate again. This time, I didn't wait a second. I ran back inside the house and locked the door again. I called 911 this time, texting my family while doing so. After 2 cops showed up to the house, they looked around the perimeter of the property with their flashlights, then came back and said to call again if this persisted. I didn't feel much better after this. It's not really like they did much. I refrained from going outside until the next day when I had work. I was a server at a nearby restaurant. I was working a late shift. I left the house in broad daylight, paranoid to hear that voice again. Thankfully, though, I didn't. Maybe seeing the police car finally scared them off. After many hours at work, I was ready to go home and collapse into bed. I pulled onto the property, parked my car out front, and walked to the front door. I stopped when I heard the sound of footsteps again. It didn't sound like an animal's footsteps, though. I stood on the front deck for a second, waiting, and then that familiar voice yelled out again, saying, "Kate, don't call the cops on me again, cutie." I yelled out, "You need help, you're sick," and let myself inside. I called the cops once more, and the cops came again, searched the perimeter again, and left. My parents told me I should stay at a friend's house for the night. I couldn't agree more. They would be back the following night, so after that, I would feel much safer being there. My friend Alex told me I could stay with her that night, so I packed a bag and was ready to go. I checked out the windows first to make sure the coast was clear. I then went outside and locked the door as fast as I could, then ran to the car. As I turned the key in the ignition, I heard something right to my left. Right outside the driver's side door was a man wearing a face mask trying to open the door. I couldn't even scream. I felt like I was choking on air. As I put the car in drive, he started hitting the glass with his elbow. I looped my car around on the grass and sped down the driveway, and I turned right up the road and didn't stop until I got to Alex's house. I was hysterically crying the whole drive there as I had Alex and her dad on the phone with me. He said he would have come and picked me up had he known the situation. We called the police together for a 3rd time in total. A couple officers went to my parents' house to investigate again, make sure no windows were shattered or anything. One officer came to Alex's house, where I once again gave my description of what happened. This was probably the most action these cops had seen in a long time in this quiet town. Thankfully, my parents came home the next day, and I felt safe staying at home again. I fully believe the man at the gas station followed me home intentionally and scoped the place out, realizing I was by myself, and for whatever reason toyed with me until he actually tried to pounce and get me. I shouldn't have given my real name, and I should have been more alert to my surroundings and realized he was following me in my car that day. Some people are nuts and have way too much time on their hands. This incident was a huge motivating factor in my moving out to my own apartment a few months later. I was home alone one night for a reason I don't remember. All I remember is my entire family was gone. I was 15 or 16 years old. I was a big gamer at the time. I was obsessed with StarCraft, and admittedly, I'd sometimes spend a weekend night or two playing StarCraft or some other PC game. This was right before COVID lockdown started. I was playing StarCraft on my computer in my bedroom on the first floor. That's when the doorbell rang, twice. I hurried to the door, not wanting to be away from the game for too long in fear of losing. I got to the front door and said, "Who is it?" as I always would if I was alone. A soft and weak voice on the other side said something that I couldn't hear. It sounded like a woman. I opened the door, with the storm door still separating me and this older woman standing on the other side, with a big smile on her face. She had her hands behind her back. I said through the door, "Can I help you?" She said she needed to use a phone, and asked if she could come inside. Ever since I was a little kid, I was always taught not to let a stranger into the house, ever. That included women. I felt so awkward though, I didn't know how to turn her away. I redirected her to the library a few blocks down, because they'd surely have a phone. Deep down, I knew the library was closed at this point, but I was just trying to get the stranger who was trying to get into my house to leave. She was still smiling, but what she said next did not match her smile. She said, "That's very rude to turn away an old lady asking for help." I replied the only way I could think to, and that was that my parents don't allow strangers into the house. It's a house rule. I slowly started closing the door as I was saying sorry, and she just stood there, not moving but still smiling at me. And though her smile never changed, it suddenly felt much more menacing. I was walking back to my room when the doorbell rang again. There was no way in hell I was opening the door again. That woman radiated weird vibes from the start. Maybe something was wrong with her, maybe she wasn't all there. These were things I had no way of knowing, and maybe that was selfish of me to send her on her way. But I just wasn't opening the door for anyone when I was home alone. I went back to my game. Not too long after I sat back down, I heard something tapping on the window. It was a clinking type sound from something metal. The window was directly in front of my desk. I had the blind pulled down so I couldn't see what was making the noise, but I already had an idea. My room was the only room with a light on in the house. The horrible thought that it was the old woman from just before, and that she walked over to my window, terrified me. I turned off the sound on my computer. At this point, I didn't care about my game anymore. The clinking sound on the window persisted. I basically said, "Fuck this," and up and left to a different room in the house. I sat in the darkness of the living room for a bit, when the doorbell rang again. This woman was harassing me now. I tried to convince myself she wasn't a threat, just some crazy old woman who's probably clueless as to where she is. When she rang the doorbell a second and third time, I decided to go open the door and ask her if there's someone I could call for her. But when I opened the door, there was now a man on the other side. He looked to be about 10 years younger than her. He said through the storm door, "Have you seen my mother?" I replied saying yes, she came to my door just before. He then apologized to me and said she has dementia and got out of the house. I suddenly felt bad, but he asked me if he could come in for a minute, and again I felt awkward. Why did he need to come inside? I said the same thing that I told to the woman who we claimed to be his mother. I said we could just talk through this door. I then said that I think she went into my backyard because I heard something at my window. I told him he could go around back and check. He thanked me and walked down the walkway, and I thought he went into the backyard. But when I went to the back and looked out the back window expecting to see him searching around, I saw nobody. Not him or his mom. This was all too weird for me. I went to bed on the earlier side that night, just falling asleep with the TV on in the background, until I heard the clinking sound on the window again. Something metal was tapping on the glass. I remembered the concerned man, and I decided to try and help. I went to the window, lifted the blind up with my hand, and I saw that woman outside my window, with that same creepy smile. She was tapping a kitchen knife on my window. I closed the blind and crawled back into my bed. This didn't feel like it was actually happening. A suspiciously short amount of time later, the doorbell rang like 4 times. The clinking on the window stopped by this point. This was all too suspicious. It felt like some kind of robbery attempt. I ignored the doorbell. I stayed in my bed. I was gonna wait this out. I didn't have a cell phone at this time. I wasn't the most social guy growing up. I also didn't want to call the police for some reason. I waited this all out until it finally stopped. The next morning, I told my dad what happened when I called him. He told me I was smart not to open the door. Everyone agreed that everything about it sounded like an attempted robbery. Is there a chance that maybe that woman really did have dementia and that the man was really her concerned son? Maybe, but it all seemed too coordinated. Why did he want to come into the house too? How did he even know she came to my house specifically? Why didn't he ever go into the backyard to look for her when I gave him permission to do so? Too many unanswered questions that lead me to believe I avoided something terrible happening if I opened that door. So as I mentioned at the start of the video, a week ago as I'm recording this, something happened to me personally that inspired me to revisit this theme. So my friend Cody asked me to watch his dog Theo for the night. Theo's a little pomsky and he barks a lot, so when he started barking like crazy at something going on outside, I didn't pay any attention to it besides telling him to be quiet a few times. But when he went to the back door and kept barking, I figured he wanted to go outside. So I was going to the back door to open it, but as I got close to the door, I realized someone was trying to open the door from the outside. And then I saw through the screen of the door there was another guy looking right back at me. This was in the backyard, which was already alarming enough, and he wasn't someone I recognized to be a family member of Cody's. So I asked him who he is, and he responded asking me if I'd seen Melissa. Melissa is Cody's younger sister who's in her 20s. Meanwhile, this guy looked like he was in his mid-50s and homeless. So I told him he needs to leave. There's no Melissa who lives here. And he said, "You sure?" So I said, "Yeah, you need to leave. There's cameras all over the property." He left right after that. Getting him to leave was easy, but when Cody asked his sister who that guy could have been, she said she had no idea. The guy looked like he was 55, drunk and filthy. Not exactly someone Cody's 20-something-year-old sister would be associating with. The fact that he went to the back door and tried letting himself in was actually pretty terrifying because you could only imagine what he was trying to do to Melissa, and it's why so many of these stories could be avoided by just keeping your doors locked. This happened in October 2019. My friends and I were in the military at the time, stationed in Colorado. We heard about this haunted road called Riverdale Road from one of our friends that was originally from Colorado. There were several different legends about the road, like stories about a ghost jogger tapping on people's windows, bloody handprints on road signs, Native American shapeshifters, ghostly hitchhikers. The list really goes on. The legend that matters for this story, however, is that of a phantom Camaro. The legend goes that a guy crashed on the road back in like the 60s or 70s as he was going too fast down the road, which has a lot of twists and turns on it, and now he haunts the road trying to race people to their death. Anyway, my friend said he'd been there several times, but nothing ever happened. With it being October and all, the rest of my friends and I really wanted to go so that we could maybe experience something spooky. So we all went super late on a Sunday night, like 1 in the morning, so it was technically Monday morning, I guess. Anyway, there were 5 of us to include myself all in one car. My friend who was a Colorado native said he went to high school with a guy who died on the road, and the guy had to cross somewhere along the road. So since a couple of the guys had to pee anyway, we all pulled over where the cross was so that they could go off to pee somewhere while the rest of us looked at the cross. It was extremely dark outside and completely quiet aside from our footsteps in the grass and the words we exchanged. We were only standing outside for a couple minutes tops, before literally out of nowhere, this car races around the bend of the road and drives past us. One of my friends made a joke, "Oh, it must be the Camaro." We all laughed, but as the car completely passed us, we saw that the taillights were indeed that of a Camaro. At that moment, all of us scrambled back into the car, and by the time we were all inside and beginning to drive away, the Camaro was right behind us, following us.
Car that turned around.
This is fucking wild.
Yo.
This is fucking
Oh
wild.
my god.
You guys scared?
This is how we died, dude.
Yo, I fucking lying.
It matched the description of the legend perfectly. It was an old black Camaro with a busted headlight. My friend who was driving was freaking out, and rightfully so. We told her to just drive the speed limit, because the legend says if you try to speed, then you die. So we went the speed limit for the rest of the road with this Camaro riding our ass. It was so close to us. The quote-unquote driver of the Camaro even turned off the headlights, which was really weird considering how dark it was outside, and they could have easily hit us without being able to see. As soon as we reached the end of what was considered Riverdale Road and were about to turn off of it, the Camaro stopped and turned around and started back in the other direction. Now, I don't know if the Phantom Camaro is real or if the legend is based off some crazy person, but it was just weird how the car literally came out of nowhere. It was so silent outside, and we would have heard it coming far sooner than when it came around the corner of the road. Plus, what kind of person would be out on this rural road at 1 in the morning on a Monday night? I don't know. I personally believe in the paranormal, so I think it was a ghost, but I try not to push my beliefs onto other people. My name is Ben. This happened back in 2007 up in the high desert in California. Around this time, Highway 138 was under long-term construction. I lived in a town called Felon, where everything was spread so far apart it would take 15 to 20 minutes just to get to the nearest gas station or food joint. I went to high school up there, and was a senior with a longtime girlfriend. She lived in Wrightwood, which was a long drive from my house that meant crossing 2 highways. My mother would work long, tiring shifts and would sleep when she got home, so asking her was out. Instead, I would hitch a ride on my girlfriend's bus to her house after school, usually on Fridays since no school the next day. Getting home was the issue, though, as it was 15 miles between our houses and I would be walking. I had done the walk so many times I learned secret pathways down the mountain through the desert that would cut my walk by an hour, though it usually meant being in the middle of nowhere. But the scariest thing to happen to me wasn't necessarily in the lonely desert, but in the street. I was dumb and lazy and would sometimes hitchhike. I usually got picked up by parents of schoolmates who recognized me or something, but not often. One day I was walking. It was around 6 p.m. I believe, as the sun was fading, and a man named Charlie pulled up in a big red van. He asked if I wanted a ride, and I said sure. As soon as I got in, something was wrong. He was twitchy and looked abnormally thin. His cheeks were sucked in and looked exhausted but wired. He stared at me for what felt like a long time, and by the time I realized I was uncomfortable, the van was already moving down Highway 2. He talked a lot, mentioning that he had a friend named Carlos. He talked about Carlos a lot, and asked questions I couldn't possibly answer, like if I knew him, or if I liked his house and if he treats me well. I told him I don't know a Carlos. I realized at this point he wasn't taking me to Highway 138. Normally when someone picks me up, they go down Highway 2 to Highway 138. It was literally the only route you could take without going through the desert. When I asked about it, he told me too many cars are held up because of the construction and he knew a quicker route through the desert. He actually pulled through the route I usually took on foot, and my heart sank. I was about to end up alone in the desert with him. He continued to talk about Carlos as I searched for something to hold on to. I found a small screwdriver in his passenger door compartment and tucked it in my hand. He mentioned that I should meet Carlos, and that he could get me a lot of money. I assured him I wasn't interested, but it was like he didn't hear me. He told me he was going to take me to meet him. Again, I told him I was fine and I was in high school and didn't need to make money. I looked outside and realized I knew the area. There were a few houses in this part of the desert, just randomly thrown here and there. I'd walked past them before. He veered down one that was further away on its own. I knew he was going to take me there no matter what I said. He drove right through the open gate and parked. I heard endless howling of dogs as he pulled up and told me to get out to meet Carlos. I was scared, and I could hear my breathing getting louder. I considered attacking him then, but I panicked. He got out, and I saw the full form that was Charlie. He was tall, at least 6'3", and definitely was tripping on something. He wobbled like a child trying to stand. He went around and opened my door, then started to yell. The house was a 2-story house, built well. For a desert house, it was clean and crisp, not the scary, rundown places you'd imagine. An average height guy came out. He was older, maybe in his 60s. He had white facial hair and a shaved head. He looked at me and didn't look away as he told Charlie to go inside, and he did. Carlos asked me what I wanted, and I said to go home, that he was giving me a ride. He stared at me and pointed to the gate and said to leave, and I did. I walked to the gate, and as soon as I felt safe, I ran. I didn't stop. As soon as I could, I called the police on my prepaid Nokia and told them everything. I still walked home and sat on my bed. I was stunned and didn't know what to do. The police never contacted me after that day. I didn't tell my mom or girlfriend. I didn't want them giving me grief for it. After all of it, I still took the bus to see her, but I made sure I had a secure ride home after, or at least learn the public bus schedules. And I never hitchhiked again, but I still remember how hard my heart was beating, and how scared I was of what could have happened. When I was 12, I had what I believe was the last sleepover of my life. It was at my friend Nick's grandma's house. She had a very old-fashioned house that, looking back at now, kind of gives me the creeps thinking about. I had been over to it a couple times, but never slept over. His grandma had a spare bedroom with 2 twin beds, which is why it seemed perfect for a sleepover. There was also this park connected to the backyard where we played hide and seek during the day. As it got darker out, his grandma called us back inside for dinner. She made linguine and clam sauce. We begged her to let us go back outside after eating to play flashlight tag in the dark. She eventually allowed it. Since her backyard basically connects to the park, with the only barrier being a bunch of trees and no fence, the game area ranged from the backyard to a certain point in the park, past the trees. We started the game with it being my turn as the seeker. Basically, I just had to find Nick and aim my flashlight at him, and that would be considered catching him. I counted down from 30 to give him time to hide. Then I left his grandma's house through the back door to begin looking. I checked some of the obvious immediate hiding spots, like under the tables, behind the chairs, by the shed. It seemed the backyard was clear so far. I heard cracks coming from the direction of the trees in the front of the park. I shined my light over into the woods, revealing someone tall, covered from head to toe in what appeared to be a giant sheet. As my light lit up the figure, they turned to face me. I could tell because I could see 2 eye holes and a small mouth hole. What in the world was I looking at? I called out Nick's name, asking if that was him, though I didn't have any idea where he could have gotten that sheet all of a sudden. I didn't have too much time to wonder about that though, because Nick came out of the trees yelling at me to run inside the house. Whoever was under that sheet wasn't Nick. We rushed to tell his grandma, whose response was to lock all the doors. She comforted us, telling us we're safe inside. However, later that night, when the 2 of us were in the spare bedroom downstairs, both in our respective beds, laying awake at like midnight just talking, we heard a couple thumps coming from upstairs. We looked at each other and wondered if that could be his grandma, whose bedroom was upstairs after all. We figured that's what it probably was, forgot about it, and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, Nick's grandma knocked on the guest bedroom door and came in. It was like 8 in the morning. And she was asking us which of us opened the window in the other spare bedroom upstairs and let all the cold air in. We said neither of us, but she didn't believe us. So she had us follow her up to the bedroom. She seemed quite angry. She pointed at the wide open window. Still, we said neither of us did it. Then she went to the bed and asked, "What's this?" as she picked up a dirty-looking crumpled up sheet thrown on the bed. She smelt it and was taken aback by its apparently horrible smell. I said, "Wait," and asked her to lay the sheet flat on the bed. She did so, and that's when I saw the 3 holes in the sheet, the eye holes and the mouth hole. That's when Nick and I knew and told her about the person in the trees under the sheet. She immediately had us leave the house with her to go next door, where she called the police. When the police showed up, 2 of them searched the house while my grandma stayed out front with a 3rd police officer. There was nobody found inside the house, but the method of entry was very easy to figure out. Whoever it was jumped off a railing in the backyard onto the awning, where they were able to easily open the window and climb in. Nothing appeared to be stolen or broken. Thank God I didn't have to stay there another night, nor did Nick. In fact, his parents had his grandma stay with them for a few days just in case. I think the scariest part would be worrying that whoever it was never left the house, and that the police might have overlooked their hiding spot. When I was around 12, I had the one bedroom in the house that wasn't on the second floor. My parents' house was a high ranch, so when you entered the house, it split off to 2 floors. One half flight of stairs going upstairs and one downstairs. The downstairs level had the den, the garage, my bedroom, and a bathroom. The other 3 bedrooms in the house were all upstairs. Since I grew up the oldest and the only boy in the house with 2 sisters, I got the room downstairs because it was the biggest and technically the coolest room. After I turned 10, my parents gave my twin bed to my little sister and I got a full-size bed, which was a bit of an upgrade because the room was big and could certainly fit a bigger bed. When I was 12, my little sisters were around 5 and 8, so at this age I would be allowed home alone. But my 5-year-old sister wouldn't be left alone with me, and my 8-year-old sister would only be left alone with me if my parents weren't going to be gone for too long. If they'd be gone for longer periods of the day, then one of my parents would take both of my sisters. For this short period of time, I'd say like 3 nights in a row, maybe a little more, I was waking up in the middle of the night for no reason, and I'd have trouble falling back asleep. Considering I was 12 years old, I knew I shouldn't have been having sleeping problems at that age. I was sleeping with the fan on next to my bed because it was a hot couple of days in the middle of the summer, so I wasn't sure what exactly was waking me up considering the fan provided a steady white noise. One of these nights, I got up after waking up to refill my glass of water. I went to the bathroom right outside my bedroom, and as I was filling it up, I thought I heard something come from inside my room. I turned off the faucet and then listened, but now there was nothing, just the sound of the fan. I walked to the doorway in my bedroom, and I couldn't tell what it was, but something was creeping me out about my room now. I went upstairs to the living room and decided to sleep on the couch that night. I fell asleep eventually, but that same night, again, I woke up, this time to noises from the kitchen. I saw the glow of the light from the fridge and the sounds of someone rummaging through it. The way that floor was set up had the kitchen out of view from the couch in the living room. I couldn't see who was there. I heard the fridge door eventually shut, then footsteps walk away and downstairs. I was drowsy, and so I went back to sleep. I believe it was the next day that my mom was folding clothes in my room and she told me my room stunk and I needed to clean up whatever that smell was. I ignored her because I really didn't smell anything. I wish I didn't ignore her though. That night, our dad put the air conditioning on because it was simply too hot. After we all watched a movie as a family, everyone started getting ready for bed. I went to my room and played video games for a little while before getting sleepy. By that time, I turned off the TV and console and rolled on my side to go to sleep like I always did. Tonight I didn't have the fan on because the air conditioning was on, so there was just the sound of the air blowing out from the vents in the ceiling. I fell asleep, but once again I woke up not long after. I didn't know what the sound I heard was. All I heard was the vent fan blowing air. Then when it stopped blowing air, the room was silent, and I heard something. Breathing. But it wasn't my breathing, though. I looked around the room. The closet door was shut, so there was no way it was coming from there. Part of my childlike innocence assumed it was my younger sister playing a prank. I got on the floor and looked the one place I could think to look. Under the bed. I lifted the little piece of cloth that dangles at the bottom of the bed, and there was a very large person laying underneath my bed on a pile of blankets. Their head was facing me, but their eyes were closed. I fell backwards and basically crab walked out of the room screaming, "Dad!" I heard my parents' door swing open and my parents yelling in concern. I pointed into my room and said, "Under the bed," and my dad went and pulled out this very large, dirty-looking man. I remember my dad quite easily physically forcing the man outside as my mom called 911. I'm sure he went to jail for a while, Or maybe not, because he was homeless, who knows? This did a lot of mental damage to me where I didn't even want to sleep in my own room anymore, or let alone in that house. I had to sleep in the middle of my parents for a while. Then my dad installed security cameras all over the house. We threw out everything that was opened in the fridge because we had no idea what he put his mouth on in there. The fear of someone being under my bed stayed with me for a long time, years to come. We don't even know how long he was hiding under my bed. It could have been a few days. The smell, the person going through the fridge, the randomly waking up every night for a few days. Whether he meant harm or not, having someone hiding under your bed is every child's biggest nightmare. This story is from my great-grandfather, who is currently at the ripe old age of 101. He's told this story at family gatherings for years. He's from the city of Yaroslavl in Russia. I guess it was the Soviet Union when he was born there. Being from the USSR, of course he served under the Soviet Union during World War II, then fleeing to the United States a few years after to escape communism. He told me this story again recently. It happened not long after the Battle of Veliki Luki, which wasn't a major battle of the war, but it still ended up in a large amount of Soviet and German bloodshed, as most battles at the time did. It was the evening, and according to my great-grandfather, it was very cold that night, like hellish cold. They were in a small house/building that was one of the few with no damage to it, which made it nice because it was warm. Him and his comrades were celebrating with drinks, songs, laughing, and joking, what you could imagine a celebration would look like. At some point in the evening, two fellow soldiers walked into the building. My great-grandfather and his friend Sergei didn't care for these two. It was apparently because they were loudmouths and were just unpleasant guys. Sergei asked my great-grandfather if he wanted to go out and have a smoke. He agreed, and the two put on their heavy coats and walked out into the freezing cold air. My great-grandfather pulled out a cigarette, as did Sergei, and then he lit both of their cigarettes. They were talking for a while, both enjoying their cigarette and basking in the glory that came along with winning the battle that had been going on for about 2 months. After my great-grandfather finished his cigarette, they were both about to go back inside when they heard what sounded like a man scream from the woods in the distance. Fearing that it was the scream from one of their comrades, possibly being attacked by a patrol of pissed-off Germans, they went back inside quickly and grabbed their guns. Because of the fact that there might be armed Germans, they got a bunch more of their fellow soldiers to run into the woods with them. My great-grandpa mentioned that as he got deeper into the woods, he started to get a weird feeling, like dread and fear. When they couldn't hear screaming anymore, my great-grandpa suggested that they all split into duos and search for whoever it was. Sergei went with him, while the others went off in their own duos. After about 2 minutes of walking through the dark, cold woodlands, my great-grandpa said that he could hear faint crying, like someone was in pain. Sergei heard this too, so they walked to where they heard the crying sounds. They started seeing drops of blood in the snow, so they both began to take the situation as more of a threat than they were earlier. It still gives me chills when my great-grandpa tells me this part. When him and Sergei got to the source of the crying sound, they had found the most bizarre and disturbing scene they had witnessed. 2 German soldiers on the ground, one of them dead, one alive. One of them had their uniforms ripped and bloodied. The alive one was cowering by a tree, muttering stuff in German. He didn't notice my great-grandpa and Sergei right away. My great-grandpa then walked towards the other body. The corpse was horrifically mutilated, missing limbs, skin ripped off the face. His uniform was shredded and it looked like he had been scalped. Another thing that stood out to my great-grandpa was the smell. He couldn't describe the smell, saying it wasn't like a dead body, but more like chemicals. The corpse looked fresh. Sergei investigated the living soldier, who then, noticing Sergei, jumped back in terror, as if he had been traumatized. He was shouting stuff in German. It was only then that my great-grandpa noticed that his leg had been torn apart and his chest was bloody. He said he could remember that German screaming something like "Das Kolas" or something similar. Sergei pulled out his pistol and put the German out of his misery with a single shot to the head. Almost immediately after this, my great-grandpa described hearing moaning-like noises, and that's when a very tall thing started running in the darkness away from them. Afraid, Sergei and great-grandpa started shooting erratically in the direction of the thing. The other men ran over, but the thing was gone. All of the men were reprimanded when they got back to the village, but a report was sent to the high command. It was never investigated further. My great-grandpa claims that it was the most terrifying experience of his life. It makes him stressed when thinking back on the sight of that mangled German and that thing. This happened when my fiancée Morgan and I just moved into our house together in a quiet little town. We still live in this house. It's a modest, cute little house perfect for us and a couple of kids if and when we decide to have. We met one of the neighbors right off the bat. They seemed nice. They were an older couple in their late 60s. The neighbors on the other side were pretty far away, so we didn't meet them for a while. We were still in the unpacking and furnishing phase. It might have been week 2 of living in the house. We were exhausted by every night, having to work our jobs and then also setting up the house and unloading. Morgan was cooking pasta in the kitchen. I was sitting at the table talking to her while on my laptop shopping for area rugs. It was a little stuffy in the house, so I was going to go slide open the back door, but as I got to it, I looked into the backyard and noticed someone sitting in one of the chairs. He was kind of hunched over with his head down. When I say I almost shit myself when I saw it, I'm not kidding. I whispered Morgan's name and said, "Don't scream," but there's a man in the yard. She walked over to look outside and gasped. She grabbed me and kind of hid behind me and said, "Go say something." "No, wait, don't." Truth be told, I myself didn't know if I should go out there or not. I'm not the biggest man, to be honest, and even though this guy had his back to us and was sitting down, he looked like he was bigger than me. Morgan suggested I knock on the glass and yell at him to leave. I didn't want to do it though, I was scared. The backyard is huge, but right outside the backyard door is a patio with the leftover furniture. The lights in the yard weren't on. We just saw him through the interior lights shining through the glass door, which meant he had to know we were in here. I said fuck it, knocked on the glass and yelled, "Hey, you need to get off our property." The man turned around and looked at me. He then got up with this half smile, almost like he was laughing. He looked 50. He had a really long gray beard and tattoos down to his wrists. He walked up to the glass. I made sure the door was locked. He stood on the other side of the glass door and shifted his gaze to Morgan. He started licking his lips and saying vile shit. I yelled, "All right, I'm calling the police." I closed the sliding blind to get him out of our faces. I called 911 and told the operator to please hurry and send police to our house. I could still hear the man on the other side of the door, now speaking at a very high volume, almost yelling, still saying disgusting things about Morgan. I put the phone to the glass so the operator could hear it. He made me stay on the phone until police would show up. Eventually it went quiet outside, and so I took a peek out the glass and the guy was gone. Still, I couldn't wait for police to arrive. And when they did, they searched the backyard, took a police report, and left. We thought it was over. But later on that night, when we were in the living room watching TV, we both agreed we heard something from outside in the yard. I went over to the window and kinked the blind, just enough to see that man outside again. He had a cigarette in his hand. He was talking to himself, or trying to talk to us, facing the house. He noticed the kink in the blinds, because he ran over to the window. I jumped back, and he started pounding on the window, saying all these awful, sick things he wanted to do to Morgan. I told her to go upstairs. I didn't want her to hear this anymore. I yelled I'm gonna call the police again, and then the pounding stopped and he went silent. I waited a few seconds before kinking the blind again, and he was gone. I went upstairs to go comfort Morgan, who was visibly shaken. I told her he was gone, when in hindsight I should have called the cops again. Downstairs, I heard bumping and knocking. I went halfway down the stairs and heard bumps on the back door and the doorknob twisting and turning. He was trying to get into the house. I grabbed the phone in the kitchen and called 911 again, once again begging the operator to send police now. This time the police arrived a lot quicker, and I didn't alert the man outside that they were coming. But unfortunately, by the time they showed up, that man disappeared again. It's very likely he just ran off into the trees deep in the backyard. He didn't come back again that night. The next day, we went around knocking on neighbors' doors, both introducing ourselves to those we hadn't met yet and asking them if they knew anyone matching the description of that man. What we found out was disturbing. A couple a few doors down from us knew that man. He was known for beating his ex-wife and having a drinking and drug problem, and generally just regarded as very dangerous. He lived around the block from us in a small, rundown house. That's the scariest part. We reported him to the police, but since we didn't have him on video, we couldn't press charges. We don't know if he still lives there because we haven't heard from or seen him in a long time. I hope it stays that way.